In the high desert of New Mexico, where the wind carries stories of love and loss across endless miles of sage, a pregnant widow tends to the wounded with hands that still shake from her own grief. Mara Callen lost her firefighter husband too, flames that consumed more than just buildings. They took her sense of safety, her plans for the future, and nearly her faith in tomorrow. Now 6 months along with their child, she works the night shift at a failing rural clinic, stitching together other people's wounds while her own heart remains torn. When a mysterious cowboy collapses at her clinic door, bleeding and refusing to explain why, Mara faces a choice that will change everything. Jace Rylan carries secrets darker than the desert night, but something in his eyes reminds her that healing sometimes requires taking risks. What begins as simple medical care becomes something deeper, a connection that threatens to awaken a heart she thought had died with her husband. But can two broken souls really heal each other? Or will Jace's dangerous past destroy the fragile family Mara is trying to protect? The Santa Rosa Community Clinic sat like a weathered monument to hope in the high desert, its adobe walls the color of dried earth, and its windows reflecting the endless sky. Mara Callen pushed through the heavy glass doors at 11:30 that October evening, her scrubs already wrinkled from the long day, her hand instinctively moving to support the growing curve of her belly. 6 months pregnant, and every step felt like a negotiation with gravity. The lobby held the familiar smell of antiseptic and desert dust, mingled with the faint aroma of coffee that had been brewing too long. Behind the reception desk, a single lamp cast a warm circle of light over patient files and appointment books that never seemed full enough anymore. The clinic served a radius of nearly 200 square miles, but the population was sparse and growing sparser as younger families moved toward the cities, leaving behind the elderly, the stubborn, and those who simply had nowhere else to go. "Mara, honey, you look tired." Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged from the back office, her gray hair pulled into a practical bun, her kind eyes showing the strain of running a medical facility on a shoestring budget. Elena had been Tom's family doctor since he was a boy, and she had delivered half the babies in the county over her 30-year career. Now in her early 60s, she should have been considering retirement, but the community couldn't spare her. "I'm fine, Dr. Vasquez, just the usual." Mara settled behind the nurse's station, opening the small wooden box she kept in her desk drawer. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, lay Tom's firefighter badge, shield number 47, the metal tarnished but still bearing the weight of honor and sacrifice. She touched it gently with one finger, a ritual that had become as natural as breathing. Tom Callen had been 32 when the warehouse fire took him, the same age as Mara now. They had planned to have children eventually, after he made lieutenant, after they saved enough money, after life settled into something predictable. But life, as Mara had learned in the most brutal way possible, had its own timeline. The baby she carried was both a blessing and a constant reminder of dreams interrupted. "How are you feeling, really?" Elena asked, pulling up a chair beside the desk. "I mean, physically, emotionally, all of it." Mara closed the box and looked out the window toward the desert, where the stars hung in impossible clarity above the horizon. "Some days I feel like I'm drowning, and some days I feel like I might actually make it to shore. Today was somewhere in between." The clinic's financial situation mirrored Mara's own precarious circumstances. Elena had explained it in gentle terms over coffee last month. Insurance reimbursements were declining, the state funding had been cut, and fewer patients meant less revenue. They were operating month to month, hoping that the next emergency wouldn't be the one that finally shuttered their doors. For Mara, losing this job would mean more than unemployment. It would mean leaving the place where she felt closest to Tom's memory, where she felt useful in the same way he had been useful. "Mrs. Patterson called earlier," Elena said, consulting her notes. "Her husband's emphysema is getting worse. She wants to know if we can do house calls again." "That's a 40-minute drive each way," Mara replied, calculating the cost of gas against the modest fee they could charge. But if he can't make it in, we'll figure it out. We always do. Elena's smile was tired but determined. That's what Tom would have done. The mention of her husband sent a familiar ache through Mara's chest. Tom had believed in service above self, in showing up when people needed you, regardless of the personal cost. He had died living by those principles, running into a burning building to search for survivors who turned out to have already escaped through a back exit. Heroic and heartbreaking in equal measure. As Elena returned to her office, Mara settled into the quiet rhythm of the night shift. She reviewed patient charts, restocked supplies, and tried not to think about the stack of medical bills waiting on her kitchen table at home. Her pregnancy had been complicated by stress and irregular eating, leading to extra appointments, additional tests, and costs that her modest insurance only partially covered. The wind chimes outside the clinic's front door began their soft, haunting melody, a sound that had once brought her comfort, but now felt like a lament. Tom had made those chimes from pieces of an old copper rain gutter they had replaced on their house, carefully tuning each piece until the notes harmonized perfectly. He had hung them outside the clinic as a surprise for her first day of work there, saying he wanted her to think of home every time she heard them. Now, they were one of the few things she had left of him, singing their lonely song to the desert night. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted Santa Rosa in shades of amber and rust as Mara drove home from her shift, the old Honda's air conditioning struggling against the early October heat. The town stretched along Highway 54 like a string of weathered beads, its adobe buildings and mobile homes telling the story of a place that had seen better decades. Once, this had been a thriving railroad stop, where cattle cars lined up for miles and the depot buzzed with activity. Now the trains still passed through twice daily, but they no longer stopped, carrying their cargo and passengers toward more prosperous destinations. At Hernandez Market, she pulled into the gravel parking lot, the familiar crunch under her tires, mixing with the sound of wind chimes from the store's covered porch. Inside, she nodded to Miguel Hernandez, whose family had run the market for 3 generations, watching the town slowly empty around them. "Mara, mija, how are you feeling?" Miguel's wife, Rosa, emerged from behind the counter, her concerned eyes taking in Mara's tired appearance. "You're working too much." "The baby and I are fine, Mrs. Hernandez." Mara selected basic groceries, bread, milk, eggs, counting bills carefully. "Dr. Vasquez says everything looks normal." "Normal?" Rosa clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Nothing about this is normal. A woman in your condition, working nights, raising a baby alone. Tom wouldn't have wanted this for you." The words stung because they carried truth. Tom had been protective to a fault, always checking the locks twice, always insisting on driving when the roads were icy, always putting her welfare before his own comfort. He would have been horrified to see her working night shifts while pregnant, would have taken 3 jobs himself before allowing it. "But Tom isn't here," Mara said gently, the words still difficult to speak aloud even after 6 months. "And I have to make decisions he can't make for me anymore." Rosa's expression softened immediately. "Ay, Misha, I'm sorry. I just worry about you. The whole town worries." That was both the blessing and the burden of small-town life. Everyone cared. But everyone also had opinions. Mara had felt the weight of collective concern since the day of Tom's funeral, when it seemed like the entire county had gathered at St. Joseph's Catholic Church to say goodbye to their hometown hero. The same people who had celebrated their wedding 3 years earlier now watched her with a mixture of sympathy and uncertainty, unsure how to help a young widow who insisted on maintaining her independence. At home, in the small adobe house she and Tom had bought with dreams of filling its 3 bedrooms with children, Mara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of herbal tea and the morning mail. The wedding photo that had once graced the mantel now lay in a box in the bedroom, too painful to look at every day. The one she kept on the kitchen counter showed a different moment. Her and Tom at last year's county fair, both of them laughing at something off-camera, his hand protective on her shoulder. The glass had cracked during one of her difficult nights, when grief had overwhelmed her and she had accidentally knocked it to the floor. The stack of medical bills seemed to grow each week. The initial emergency room visit when her blood pressure had spiked. The specialized ultrasounds when her stress levels had concerned Dr. Martinez, her obstetrician in Roswell. The additional prenatal vitamins and supplements she couldn't get covered by insurance. Each envelope represented another month of her clinic salary. Another month of barely breaking even. Mrs. Rodriguez, her elderly neighbor, appeared at the kitchen window as she did most mornings. At 78, Maria Rodriguez had buried 2 husbands and raised 6 children, and she had appointed herself as Mara's unofficial guardian since Tom's death. "Mara, have you eaten?" The question came through the open window, accompanied by the aroma of fresh tortillas. "I'm about to," Mara called back, though her refrigerator held little beyond the basics she had just purchased. Minutes later, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the front door with a covered plate and the determined expression of someone who would not be refused. "Breakfast burritos. The baby needs protein." They sat together at the small table, Mrs. Rodriguez chattering about her grandchildren while Mara ate gratefully. The older woman had a gift for filling silence without requiring much response, understanding that sometimes the best comfort was simply presence. "You know," Mrs. Rodriguez said carefully, "my nephew Carlos is doing well with his auto repair shop in Roswell. He's been asking about you." "Mrs. Rodriguez," Mara began. "I'm not matchmaking," the older woman protested, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just saying, you don't have to carry this burden alone. Tom was a good man. May he rest in peace, but he wouldn't want you to stop living." The conversation was familiar territory. Well-meaning friends and family had begun suggesting with increasing frequency that it was time for Mara to start over, as if grief operated on a schedule. And 6 months was sufficient time to process the loss of a marriage, a future, and a way of life. They meant well, but they didn't understand that she wasn't ready to stop being Tom's wife, even if he was no longer there to be her husband. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Mara stood in the doorway of what was to have been the nursery, now filled. With boxes of Tom's belongings she couldn't bring herself to sort through. His turnout gear hung in the closet, still smelling faintly of smoke and duty. His books on fire science and emergency medicine sat on shelves he had built himself, each volume carefully highlighted and annotated with his methodical handwriting. Baby kicked gently, as if responding to her emotional state, and Mara placed both hands on her belly. "I know, little one, your daddy would have loved you so much. He would have been the kind of father who read bedtime stories in funny voices, and taught you to ride a bike, and worried too much when you started dating." The October wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and sending dust devils dancing across the yard. In 4 months, she would bring her child home to this house filled with memories of a man the baby would never know. She would have to find a way to honor Tom's memory while building a life that could exist without him. A prospect that felt both necessary and impossible. The sleepless nights had become Mara's most faithful companions. At 2 in the morning, when the desert silence pressed against the windows and the baby's movements made comfortable positions impossible, she found herself having conversations with the child she carried, long, rambling talks about everything and nothing, as if preparing them both for a world that would require explanations she wasn't sure she could provide. "Your father believed in signs," she whispered to her belly, resting in the rocking chair Tom had bought at a garage sale, and spent weeks refinishing. "He said the universe had a way of putting people where they needed to be, when they needed to be there. I used to think that was romantic nonsense, but now I wonder if maybe he was preparing me for something I couldn't see coming." The stack of unpaid medical bills sat on the coffee table like an accusation, each envelope a reminder of how quickly financial stability could crumble. The initial shock of Tom's death had been followed by a cascade of practical realities. Life insurance that covered the mortgage but little else, medical benefits that ended with his employment, and the gradual understanding that her salary at the clinic, while sufficient for a couple living modestly, would barely support a single mother and child. She had tried to organize the bills by priority, but they all seemed urgent. The hospital wanted payment for her emergency room visit in August, when stress and dehydration had sent her blood pressure dangerously high. Dr. Martinez's office was requesting settlement of charges for the additional ultrasounds and monitoring her pregnancy required. The pharmacy had begun calling about the prenatal vitamins and medications her insurance only partially covered. "I know you don't understand money yet," she continued her midnight conversation, "but it's going to matter in ways I wish it didn't. It's the difference between the fancy crib at the baby store and the used one from the church rummage sale. It's the difference between taking maternity leave and going back to work when you're 6 weeks old, because we can't afford for me to stay home longer." The irony wasn't lost on her that she spent her working hours caring for others while neglecting her own needs. Dr. Vasquez had expressed concern about her stress levels, had recommended reducing her hours, but Mara couldn't afford the luxury of self-care when every paycheck barely covered necessities. She had started skipping lunch to save money, telling herself the baby would be fine as long as she took her vitamins, but the constant fatigue suggested her body disagreed with this economy. The baby's father had been a planner, the kind of man who researched every major purchase and maintained detailed budgets in spiral notebooks. He would have calculated the exact cost of raising a child, would have increased their life insurance policies, and started a college fund before they even began trying to conceive. Without his methodical approach to finances, Mara felt like she was navigating by stars she couldn't quite see clearly. "The thing about your daddy," she said, shifting position as the baby pressed against her ribs, "is that he made everything seem possible. When we talked about having children, he had it all figured out. Which bedroom would be the nursery, how we'd save for piano lessons or soccer gear, what college fund would give us the best return on investment. He made me believe we had all the time in the world to get it right." A car passed on the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating the living room before disappearing into the darkness. The sound of the engine faded gradually, leaving behind the familiar quiet that could feel either peaceful or lonely, depending on her mood. Tonight, it felt heavy with questions she couldn't answer. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Martinez's office, a reminder about her appointment next week, and a gentle note that her account was past due. The medical practice was understanding about payment plans, but even the reduced monthly amounts they had agreed upon were stretching her budget beyond its limits. "I'm scared," she admitted aloud, the words carrying the weight of everything she couldn't say to her friends or family. "I'm scared I won't be enough for you. I'm scared I'll make the wrong decisions and you'll pay the price. I'm scared that trying to honor your father's memory while building our future is going to tear me apart." The baby responded with a series of gentle kicks, and Mara imagined it was reassurance, though she knew it was more likely discomfort from her position. She struggled to her feet and moved to the kitchen, where she made another cup of herbal tea and stood looking out at the desert landscape bathed in moonlight. During these quiet hours, when the rest of the world slept and she wrestled with uncertainty, Mara sometimes felt Tom's presence most strongly, not in any supernatural sense, but in the echo of conversations they had shared about responsibility, about doing what was right even when it was difficult, about the difference between surviving and living. He would have wanted her to thrive, not just endure, but the path between those two states seemed impossibly complex from where she stood. "Dr. Vasquez thinks I should consider moving closer to family," she told the baby, returning to her chair. My sister in Phoenix has offered to let us stay with her until I get back on my feet. It would solve the money problems, at least temporarily, but it would mean leaving this place, leaving the clinic, leaving everything that still feels like home. The rocking chair creaked gently as she settled back into its embrace, the rhythm soothing both her and the child. Tom had tested every joint and screw in this chair, determined that it would be safe and sturdy enough for the children they planned to have. Now, it served as a vessel for carrying both her hopes and her fears through the long nights when sleep refused to come. Maybe that's what growing up really means, she continued, learning that love isn't always enough, that good intentions don't pay bills or guarantee happiness. Your father died believing that doing the right thing was worth any sacrifice, and maybe he was right. But now I have to figure out what the right thing is when the stakes are your future, instead of just my own. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of weather changes to come. October in New Mexico meant the beginning of the season when anything could happen. Snow or sunshine, bitter cold or surprising warmth, sometimes within the same day. It seemed an appropriate metaphor for the uncertainty that had become the defining characteristic of her life. The storm arrived without warning, as desert storms often do, transforming the clear October night into a chaos of wind and driving rain. Mara watched from the clinic's front window as tumbleweeds cartwheeled across the highway and lightning split the sky in jagged white scars. The power had flickered twice in the past hour, and she had already prepared the emergency generator procedures, though she hoped not to need them. At midnight, she was restocking the supply cabinets when the sound of an engine cut through the storm's roar. Headlights swept across the parking lot, wavering as if the driver was struggling to maintain control. The vehicle, an old pickup truck with one headlight dark, came to an abrupt stop near the clinic's entrance, the engine cutting off with a mechanical wheeze that suggested it had been pushed beyond its limits. For several minutes, nothing happened. The truck sat silent in the rain while Mara debated whether to investigate. Then the driver's door opened and a figure stumbled out, immediately falling to one knee before struggling upright again. Even through the rain and darkness, she could see something was seriously wrong. The man made it 3 steps toward the clinic before collapsing completely, his body hitting the wet pavement with a sound that made Mara's medical training override her caution. She grabbed the emergency medical kit and rushed outside, the rain soaking through her scrubs within seconds. "Sir, can you hear me?" She knelt beside him, her hands automatically checking for a pulse while her eyes assessed visible injuries. He was conscious, but barely, his breathing shallow and rapid. Blood seeped through a tear in his denim jacket, and his jeans were dark with what looked like more than rainwater. "Don't," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Don't call the police." It was an odd first request from someone who clearly needed immediate medical attention, but Mara filed it away for later consideration. "I'm a nurse. I'm going to help you, but I need to get you inside." With considerable effort and his minimal assistance, she managed to help him to his feet and half carry him through the clinic's entrance. In the fluorescent lighting, the extent of his injuries became clear: a gunshot wound to his left side that had bled extensively, multiple bruises on his face and arms, and the exhausted pallor of someone who'd been running on adrenaline for far too long. "What's your name?" she asked, helping him onto an examination table. "Jace," he said after a moment's hesitation. "Jace Rylan." "Okay, Jace, I'm Mara. I need to examine this wound, and it's going to hurt." She began cutting away his jacket and shirt, revealing the full extent of the damage. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his side, missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. "How long ago did this happen?" "Few hours," he said, wincing as she cleaned the area. "Maybe more. Hard to tell." "Who shot you?" His jaw tightened. "Nobody you need to worry about." Mara paused in her work to study his face. He was perhaps 35, with weathered features that spoke of outdoor work and hard living. His hands bore the calluses of manual labor, and his boots were the practical kind worn by men who spent their days on horseback or working ranches. But his eyes held something deeper than physical pain, a wariness that suggested he was more familiar with trouble than most people should be. "I have to report gunshot wounds," she said, though something in his expression made her hesitate. "Please." The word carried desperation. "I'm not asking you to lie for me. Just give me a chance to explain before you make any calls." Against her better judgment, Mara found herself nodding. "Let me get you stabilized first, then we'll talk." She worked efficiently, cleaning and suturing the wound, while Jace gritted his teeth and maintained stoic silence. His injuries suggested violence, but his demeanor suggested someone more victim than perpetrator. When she moved to examine a cut on his forehead, he flinched away from her touch with the reflexive wariness of someone accustomed to expecting pain rather than care. "Easy," she said gently. "I'm just checking for concussion symptoms." As she worked, she noticed details that complicated her initial assessment. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots expensive despite their age. A silver cross hung from a chain around his neck, tarnished but well-maintained. Most telling was his reaction to her pregnancy. When her condition became obvious as she moved around the examination table, his expression softened with something like protective concern. "You shouldn't be lifting me," he said when she helped him sit up, "not in your condition." "I'm a nurse, not an invalid," she replied. But his consideration touched her. Tom had been the same way, always worried about her welfare, even when his own needs were more pressing. The storm continued to rage outside, and Mara realized they were effectively trapped together until it passed. Jace's truck had looked unlikely to start again, and her Honda would struggle in the flooding that often accompanied these desert downpours. "The wound's not as bad as it could have been," she told him, securing the bandage. "But you've lost a lot of blood, and you need rest. I'm going to start an IV to get some fluids into you." As she prepared the IV, Jace's weathered cowboy hat caught her attention. It lay on the chair where she had placed his discarded clothes, the felt darkened with blood and rain. Something about it seemed significant, not just a hat, but a piece of identity, the kind of thing a man wouldn't abandon lightly. "That hat's been through some miles," she observed. "Belonged to my grandfather," Jace said, following her gaze. "About the only thing of value I got left." The admission carried weight beyond its simple words. Here was a man who had been reduced to essentials, carrying nothing but what mattered. Most. Whatever had brought him to her clinic door, it had cost him nearly everything. "Jace," she said, settling into the chair beside the examination table, "I need to know what I'm dealing with here. Are you in danger? Are the people who shot you likely to come looking for you?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he looked directly at her, and she saw something in his eyes that reminded her of the wild horses that sometimes appeared near the clinic, beautiful and powerful, but ready to bolt at the first sign of threat. "I made some bad choices," he said finally. "Got involved with people I shouldn't have. The kind of people who don't forgive mistakes." "What kind of people?" "The kind who solve problems with bullets." He gestured weakly toward his bandaged side. "I've been running for 2 days, and my truck's about done for. Truth is, I don't know if they're still following me, but if they are..." He didn't finish the sentence, but Mara understood the implication. By helping him, she might be putting herself and her unborn child at risk. The responsible thing would be to call the authorities immediately, to distance herself from whatever trouble he carried. Instead, she found herself saying, "Then we'd better make sure you're strong enough to keep running when the storm passes." Dawn arrived grey and subdued, the storm having passed but leaving behind a landscape transformed by rain and wind. Jace had slept fitfully on the examination table, waking periodically with the startled alertness of someone accustomed to danger. Mara had dozed in the chair beside him, her medical instincts keeping her attuned to any changes in his condition even while she rested. When Dr. Vasquez arrived at 7:30 for the morning shift, She found them in what looked like an unusual but peaceful tableau, the pregnant nurse monitoring her mysterious patient, both of them bathed in the soft light filtering through rain-streaked windows. "Well," Elena said, taking in the scene with the practiced calm of someone who had seen everything the desert could deliver to her clinic. "I assume there's a story here." Mara rose stiffly, her back protesting the night spent in the chair. "Gunshot. Wound. Through and through, no vital organs hit. He arrived during the storm." Elena approached the examination table where Jace was now fully awake, his dark eyes tracking her movements with careful attention. "I'm Dr. Vasquez. How are you feeling?" "This morning, Mr. Rylan, Jace Rylan." His voice was stronger than it had been the night before, though still carrying the roughness of exhaustion. "Better than I have any right to feel, thanks to your nurse here." "Mara's one of the best," Eleanor agreed, beginning her own examination of his wound. "This is clean work. You're lucky, a few inches in either direction, and we'd be having a very different conversation." As Eleanor worked, Mara noticed how Jace submitted to the examination with patient resignation, answering medical questions honestly while deflecting anything that touched on the circumstances of his injury. He was polite but guarded, the kind of man who revealed nothing unless specifically asked, and sometimes not even then. "I've called Sheriff Cardenas," Eleanor announced, causing Jace to tense visibly. "Gunshot wounds are mandatory reporting, Mr. Rylan. I'm sure you understand." "Of course," Jace said, though his knuckles went white where he gripped the edge of the table. When something small and metallic fell from his jacket pocket as Elena moved it aside, Mara bent to retrieve it. A silver cross on a tarnished chain, obviously old and well-worn. The metal was warm from body heat, and she could see where it had been polished smooth by years of handling. "This fell out," she said, offering it to him. Jace's entire demeanor changed as he took the cross, his fingers closing around it with the reverence usually reserved for sacred things. "Thank you, It was my mother's." "It's beautiful," Mara said, noting the way he immediately fastened it around his neck, as if its absence had left him somehow incomplete. "She gave it to me when I left home," Jace said quietly. "Told me it would keep me safe, help me remember who I was supposed to be." His laugh held no humor. "Can't say I've done much to honor either of those hopes." Elena finished her examination and began preparing discharge instructions. "The wound is healing well, but you need rest and proper nutrition. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity. I'm prescribing antibiotics and pain medication." "I appreciate everything you've done," Jace said, "but I can't stay in town. People I need to avoid might come looking." "Where will you go?" Mara asked, surprised by her own concern for this stranger's welfare. "Don't know yet. Somewhere they won't think to. Look." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Tom Cardenas, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had known Tom Callen since boyhood. His presence filled the small examination room with quiet authority, though his manner remained conversational rather than confrontational. "Morning, folks. Dr. Vasquez, Mara." He nodded to each woman before focusing on Jace. "I understand you've had some trouble, Mr. Rylan." "Some," Jace agreed carefully. "Care to tell me about it?" Jace was quiet for a long moment, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the cross beneath his shirt. "I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, Sheriff. Got caught up in something that wasn't my business." "That's not much of an explanation. It's all I can give you without putting other people at risk." Sheriff Cardenas studied him with the patient attention of someone who had spent decades reading people's motivations and finding truth in incomplete stories. "You running drugs, Mr. Rylan?" "No, sir." "Stealing cattle?" "No, sir." "Murder?" "No, sir." "Then what kind of trouble are we talking about?" Jace looked directly at the sheriff, and Mara saw something like resolve settle into his features. "The kind where good intentions led to bad decisions, and now people are paying for my mistakes." It wasn't really an answer, but something in his tone suggested it was as close to the truth as he could safely come. Sheriff Cardenas seemed to recognize this as well, his expression thoughtful rather than suspicious. "I'm going to run your name through the system, Mr. Rylan. If you're wanted for something serious, this conversation's going to take a different direction." "I understand." While they waited for the background check, Mara found herself observing Jace with growing curiosity. His mannerisms suggested education, despite his rough appearance. He spoke carefully, choosing words with precision, and his hands, though calloused, moved with a kind of refined control that spoke of skills beyond ranch work. When he caught her watching him, she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Sorry, occupational hazard. I tend to study people when I'm trying to figure out how to help them." "And what's your professional assessment?" There was gentle humor in his question, the first lightness she had seen from him. "You're not what you appear to be," she said honestly. "Most cowboys I've treated don't use words like circumstances and implications, and they certainly don't quote scripture under their breath when they think nobody's listening." Jace's expression grew more guarded. "Maybe I'm just better educated than most. Maybe. Or maybe you're someone who used to be something else, and now you're trying to figure out who you're supposed to be next." The accuracy of her observation seemed to surprise him. For a moment, his careful composure slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath the wariness. "You're pretty insightful for someone so young," he said. "Grief has a way of teaching you to see through pretense," Mara replied. "When you've lost everything that defined you, you get good at recognizing when other people are carrying the same kind of emptiness." Sheriff Cardenas returned before Jace could respond, his expression neutral but not hostile. "You're clean. Mr. Rylan, no outstanding warrants, no criminal record. Whatever trouble you're in, it's not the kind that shows up in official databases." "Thank you, Sheriff. That said, I'd appreciate it if you moved along once you're able to travel. Nothing personal, but we've got enough problems in this county without borrowing trouble from somewhere else." After the sheriff left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the examination room. Jace's truck had been towed to Miguel's garage, where the preliminary assessment was that it would need significant repairs that would take time and money he clearly didn't have. "There's a motel on the highway," Elena suggested. "Nothing fancy, but it's clean and cheap." "I appreciate the suggestion," Jace said, "but I'm a little short on resources at the moment." Mara found herself speaking before she could reconsider. The wisdom of her words. "The clinic has a small apartment upstairs. We use it sometimes when we have to stay overnight for emergencies. It's not much, but there's a bed and a kitchenette." Elena and Jace both looked at her with surprise, though, for different reasons. "Mara," Elena said carefully, "are you sure that's appropriate? He needs rest to heal properly, and he can't afford other accommodations. We're medical professionals. We help people recover from injuries. That's what we do." It was a rationalization, and they all knew it, but it was also true. Jace needed time to heal, and something about his situation had awakened her instinct to provide sanctuary. Perhaps it was the way he had worried about her pregnancy, even while bleeding, or the reverence with which he handled his mother's cross, or simply the recognition of someone else who had lost their way and was trying to find their footing again. "I couldn't impose like that," Jace said, though his relief was evident. "It's not an imposition," Mara replied. "It's medicine." The clinic's upstairs apartment hadn't been used in months, and it showed. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through small windows, and the air held the stale quality of a space long unoccupied. Mara climbed the narrow stairs ahead of Jace, acutely aware of his labored breathing as he followed, one hand pressed to his bandaged side. "It's not much," she said, opening the door to reveal a studio space with a twin bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom barely large enough for one person. "Dr. Vasquez used to live here when she first started the practice, before she bought her house in town." Jace surveyed the apartment with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to take shelter for granted. "It's perfect. More than I expected, honestly. There are clean sheets in the closet, and I think there's still some canned food in the pantry from when we had to stay here during that blizzard last winter." Mara moved around the small space, opening windows to let in fresh air, her movements automatic, but tinged with nervous energy. "Mara." His voice was gentle but serious. "Why are you helping me?" She paused in her tidying, considering the question that had been nagging at her own conscience. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe because you remind me that there are still people in the world who worry about pregnant women they barely know. Maybe because I recognize someone who's lost and trying to find their way back to something that makes sense. And maybe because you're too kind for your own good. Tom used to say that." The words slipped out before she could stop them, bringing with them the familiar ache of mentioning her husband to someone who had never known him. "Tom was your husband." It wasn't a question, and something in Jace's tone suggested he had already pieced together more of her story than she had shared. "Yes, he died 6 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss." The simple words carried a weight that suggested personal familiarity with grief. Mara found herself looking at him more closely, noting the way his expression had softened with genuine sympathy rather than the awkward discomfort most people showed when confronted with her widowhood. "Were you married?" she asked. "No, never found the right person at the right time." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, wincing slightly. "Came close once, but I wasn't the man she deserved, and she was smart enough to figure that out before I could disappoint her too badly." There was regret in his voice, but not bitterness, the tone of someone who had accepted responsibility for his failures rather than blaming circumstances or other people. It was an attractive quality in a man, Mara realized, and the thought immediately made her feel guilty. "I should let you rest," she said, moving toward the door. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything." "Mara." She turned back to find him pulling something from his jacket pocket, a small piece of wood, roughly carved, but recognizable as a horse. "I was working on this while I was driving, trying to stay awake. Habit of mine when I'm nervous." She accepted. The carving, surprised by its weight and the smooth finish his hands had achieved with what must have been a simple pocket knife. The horse was small enough to fit in her palm, but the proportions were perfect. And there was something alive in the curve of its neck and the suggestion of movement in its stance. "You made this?" "My grandfather taught me. Said whittling was good for the soul, gave your hands something to do while your mind worked through problems." Jace's fingers moved unconsciously, as if they were accustomed to holding knife and wood. "I thought maybe your baby might like it someday, when they're old enough, I mean." The gift touched her more deeply than she expected. Here was a man who had arrived bleeding and penniless, who was running from danger he wouldn't fully explain, and his first thought had been to create something beautiful for a child he might never meet. "It's wonderful," she said, meaning it. "Thank you. It's not much. It's perfect." Downstairs, Elena was updating patient files and preparing for the evening shift transition. She looked up when Mara appeared, the wooden horse still cradled in her hands. "Everything settled upstairs?" "He's resting." Mara sat down at her desk, placing the carving carefully beside her computer. "Elena, what do you think of him? Professionally or personally?" "Both." Elena considered the question with the deliberate thoughtfulness that made her such a good doctor. "Professionally, he's a model patient, follows instructions, doesn't complain, shows appropriate concern for others' welfare. Personally," she paused. "He's hiding something significant, but I don't think he's dangerous, at least not to us." Sheriff Cardenas seemed satisfied that he's not a criminal. "There's a difference between not being wanted by law enforcement and not being in trouble," Elena pointed out. "But sometimes good people make bad choices and end up in situations they can't easily explain." It was a fair assessment, and one that aligned with Mara's own instincts. Whatever Jace's story, he didn't seem like a man who would bring deliberate harm to innocent people. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Mara would check on Jace each morning before her shift ended, bringing him coffee and updating him on his healing progress. He was a compliant patient, following her instructions carefully and showing steady improvement. But it was their conversations that surprised her. Lengthy discussions about books, current events, philosophy, and life in general that revealed depths she hadn't expected. You read a lot, she observed on the third morning, noting the paperback novel he had borrowed from the clinic's small waiting room library. Always have. My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She insisted that education was something nobody could take away from you, no matter what else went wrong in life. What did your father do? Ranched. Had a small spread in eastern Colorado, raised cattle and horses. Good man, but not much for books or deep thinking. He believed in hard work and simple solutions. And you're more like your mother, in some ways. But I inherited his stubborn streak and his talent for making complicated situations worse by trying to fix them. It was another oblique reference to whatever trouble had brought him to her clinic. But Mara didn't push for details. She had learned that Jace revealed information gradually, in small pieces that had to be assembled over time to form a complete picture. On the fourth day, she found him in the clinic's main examination room, having descended the stairs despite her instructions to rest. He was methodically organizing the supply cabinets, arranging items by category and expiration date with the systematic efficiency of someone accustomed to maintaining order in chaotic situations. "You're supposed to be in bed," she said, though she was more impressed than annoyed by his initiative. "I've been lying around for 4 days. Figured I could make myself useful instead of just taking up space. This is exactly the kind of activity I told you to avoid. I'm being careful. Besides, some of these supplies were so disorganized I couldn't help myself. It was driving me crazy." Despite her protests, Mara had to admit that his organizational efforts were improving the clinic's efficiency. He had created a logical system for inventory that would save precious time during emergencies, and his attention to detail had identified several expired medications that needed to be replaced. "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked, watching him work. "Me," he said simply. "Supply logistics. Turns out the same principles apply whether you're managing medical supplies or military equipment." It was the first concrete detail about his background beyond his family history, and it explained some of the discipline and precision she had noticed in his behavior. Military training would account for his ability to remain calm under pressure, his respectful manner with authority figures, and his instinct to help rather than simply accept help. "How long did you serve?" 8 years. Did 2 tours overseas before I decided I'd had enough of taking orders and seeing good people die for complicated political reasons. Is that when you became a cowboy? Jace smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression she had seen from him. Not exactly. Spent some time trying to figure out who I was supposed to be as a civilian. Worked construction, drove truck, tried my hand at various things. The ranch work came later, when I realized I needed something that felt more like a calling than just a job. And did you find it? For a while. Until I proved my father was right about my talent for complicating simple situations. The self-deprecating humor in his voice suggested that whatever mistakes he had made, he had learned from them. It was an attractive quality. The ability to acknowledge fault without wallowing in self-pity or shifting blame to others. As Mara watched him work, she found herself thinking less about the mystery of his past and more about the reality of his present. Here was a man who created beautiful things with his hands, who worried about other people's welfare, who took responsibility for his mistakes, and who brought order to chaos wherever he went. These were qualities Tom would have respected, she realized, and the thought no longer filled her with guilt. By the end of his first week at the clinic, Jace had transformed from patient to unofficial assistant, his presence becoming so naturally integrated into the daily operations that Mara found it difficult to remember how they had managed without him. His wound was healing remarkably well, the clean entry and exit points closing with minimal scarring, but more importantly, his guarded demeanor was gradually giving way to something that resembled peace. "You don't have to do that," Mara said. Finding him in the supply room at dawn, taking inventory of their dwindling stock of basic medications. "I know, but I need to feel useful, and you need help whether you admit it or not." He made a note on his handwritten list. His penmanship, neat and precise. When's the last time anyone did a proper audit of what you have versus what you need? Probably never, she admitted. Elena handles the ordering, but she usually just replaces what runs out without looking at the bigger picture. That's what I figured. You're understocked on antibiotics and pain medications, overstocked on things that expire before you can use them, and your organization system. He shook his head with gentle exasperation. It's like someone threw supplies at shelves and hoped for the best. His criticism was accurate but delivered without judgment, the observation of someone who genuinely wanted to help rather than criticize. It was a refreshing change from the careful sympathy most people offered her, as if her widowhood made her too fragile for honest feedback. "I brought you something," she said, producing a small plastic container from her bag. "Mrs. Rodriguez insisted I share her cornbread recipe with you. Apparently, the sight of a man getting too thin offends her maternal instincts." Inside the container were 6 perfectly golden squares of cornbread, still warm and fragrant with the aroma of corn, meal and honey. Jace accepted the gift with genuine appreciation, breaking off a piece and tasting it with the careful attention of someone who understood that food could be an expression of care. "This is incredible," he said. "Your neighbor has serious skills." It was actually my mother-in-law's recipe originally. Tom's mother taught it to Mrs. Rodriguez, who taught it to me. Mara settled into one of the plastic chairs they kept in the supply room for breaks. "It's one of the few things I can make that actually tastes like it's supposed to." "You don't cook much." "I'm learning by necessity." Tom did most of the cooking. In our house, said it relaxed him after long shifts at the fire station. "I was always too busy with work or school to develop domestic skills." She smiled at the memory. "He used to joke that my idea of gourmet cooking was adding seasoning salt to ramen noodles." "What was he like?" Jace asked gently. "Tom." It was the first time anyone had asked her to describe her husband, rather than simply offering condolences. About his death. The question caught her off guard, but she found herself wanting to answer, to share the reality of the man she had loved, rather than just the tragedy of losing him. "He was steady," she said, searching for words that could capture the essence of someone so fundamentally good. "Not in a boring way, but in the way that made you feel safe. He had this ability to make everything seem manageable, no matter how overwhelming it looked. When I was studying for my nursing boards and having panic attacks about failing, he'd make me tea and sit with me while I reviewed flashcards for the 100th time. Never lost patience, never made me feel stupid for being scared. He sounds like a good man, the best, but also stubborn as a mule when he thought he was right about something." Her laugh held both affection and exasperation. "He once spent an entire weekend rebuilding our kitchen faucet because he was convinced he could fix it himself, even though the replacement part cost $12. By the time he admitted defeat and called a plumber, we'd spent $40 on tools and supplies." The principle of the thing. Exactly. He couldn't stand the idea of paying someone else to do something he felt he should be able to handle himself. She paused, studying Jace's face. "You remind me of him in some ways. That same need to be useful, to contribute rather than just accept help." "Maybe that's why you decided to help me," Jace suggested. "Familiar behavior patterns." It was a perceptive observation, and probably accurate, though Mara suspected her motivations were more complex than simple recognition of familiar traits. There was something about Jace himself, his quiet competence, his thoughtful manner, his obvious intelligence tempered by genuine humility, that would have attracted her attention, regardless of any resemblance to Tom. "Tell me about your family," she said, deflecting from the uncomfortable accuracy of his assessment. "Not much to tell that would interest you. My grandfather raised horses and taught me to whittle. My mother read poetry and believed in the power of education to redeem any circumstance. My father worked hard and died young from a heart attack brought on by too many years of stress and not enough medical care. I'm sorry. It was 10 years ago. Long enough that the sharp edges have worn." Smooth. Jace finished the piece of cornbread and carefully closed the container. But it taught me that time isn't guaranteed, and neither is the luxury of waiting for perfect circumstances to make important decisions. Is that what brought you here? An important decision? His expression grew guarded again, the openness of the previous moment shuttering behind familiar wariness. Something like that. It was clearly all he was prepared to share, and Mara didn't push. Whatever secrets he carried, he would reveal them in his own time, if at all. For now, it was enough that he was healing, that he was contributing to the clinic's welfare, and that his presence had brought a sense of companionship she hadn't realized she was missing. Over the following days, their collaboration deepened into something that felt almost like partnership. Jace's organizational skills and attention to detail complemented Mara's medical expertise and knowledge of the community. He streamlined their supply system, identified equipment that needed maintenance, and even suggested improvements to patient flow that would reduce waiting times and increase efficiency. More importantly, his presence during the long night shifts provided a sense of security that Mara hadn't realized she needed. The clinic had always felt safe enough during daylight hours, when Dr. Vasquez was present and the town was awake. But the overnight hours had become increasingly isolating as her pregnancy progressed and her energy levels declined. "You don't have to stay up all night just because I'm working," she told him after finding him reading in the waiting room at 3 in the morning. "I'm not much of a sleeper anyway," he replied. "Besides, someone should be here in case you need help. Lifting things, reaching high shelves, dealing with difficult patients. We don't get many difficult patients, but when you do, it's better to have backup." His protectiveness was subtle but unmistakable, expressed through practical assistance rather than overt gestures. He made sure she ate regular meals, encouraged her to rest when the clinic was quiet, and took over physically demanding tasks without making her feel incapable. It was the kind of consideration Tom had shown, but different, less possessive, more respectful of her independence. "Elena thinks you're planning to stay," Mara said one morning as they worked together to update patient files. "What do you think?" "I think you're someone who makes decisions carefully and doesn't share them until you're certain." "That's a fair assessment." He paused in his work, considering his words. "I also think I'm someone who's spent too many years running from problems instead of solving them. Maybe it's time I tried a different approach. And if the people who shot you come looking, then I'll deal with that when it happens. But I won't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, and I won't keep running from the possibility of building something worth protecting." It was the closest he had come to expressing long-term intentions, and Mara felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby's movements. The idea of Jace staying, of his becoming a permanent part of her world, rather than just a temporary respite from loneliness, was both appealing and terrifying. "The town's not much," she said, testing his resolve. "Limited opportunities, harsh weather, people who've known each other's business for 3 generations. "Sounds like home," Jace replied, and something in his tone suggested he meant it. 3. Weeks after Jace's arrival, Mara's routine ultrasound appointment in Roswell revealed what she had been hoping to hear. Her stress levels had stabilized, her blood pressure was normal, and the baby was developing exactly as expected. Dr. Martinez, her obstetrician, noted the improvement in her overall health with professional satisfaction. "Whatever changes you've made in your life, keep doing them," he said, studying the ultrasound images on his monitor. "Your baby is measuring perfectly, heart rate is strong, and you look better than you have in months." "I've had some help recently," Mara said, watching the grainy black-and-white image of her child moving on the screen. "Someone's been making sure I eat properly and get enough rest." "Good. Support systems are crucial during pregnancy, especially for single mothers." Dr. Martinez printed several copies of the ultrasound images, the baby's profile clearly visible in the clearest shot. "Do you want to know the sex?" Mara had been avoiding this question for weeks, torn between practical considerations and emotional ones. Knowing would make shopping and preparations easier, but it would also make the baby feel more real, more individual, and therefore more daunting to face as a single parent. "Yes," she said finally, "I think I'm ready. Congratulations. You're having a daughter." The drive back to Santa Rosa gave Mara time to process this new information. A daughter, a little girl who would need different things than she had been imagining, who would ask different questions, who would grow up in a world that still presented unique challenges for women. Tom would have been thrilled. He had always talked about teaching their children to be strong and independent, but he had specific dreams about having a daughter to spoil and protect. She found Jace in the clinic's garden, a small plot behind the building where Dr. Vasquez grew herbs for teas and basic remedies. He was repairing the irrigation system with the patient precision she had come to associate with everything he did, his hands steady as he worked to replace a broken connection. "How did the appointment go?" he asked without looking up from his work. "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." She sat carefully on the wooden bench Tom had built years earlier, noting how Jace had weeded the beds and pruned the overgrown sage plants back to manageable proportions. "Dr. Martinez says the baby is developing perfectly." "That's wonderful news." This time he did look up, his expression showing genuine relief. "I know you've been worried. I found out the sex," she said, pulling the ultrasound images from her purse. "It's a girl." Something shifted in Jace's expression as he absorbed this information, a softening that suggested the baby had just become more real to him as well. He wiped his hands clean on his jeans before accepting the ultrasound photos, studying them with the careful attention he gave to everything important. "She's beautiful," he said finally, though the image was barely recognizable as human to untrained. "Eyes, perfect little nose, you can see that? My sister had 3 kids before." He stopped abruptly, as if he had revealed more than he intended. "I got good at reading ultrasound pictures. She looks healthy and strong." It was another glimpse into his past, another piece of the puzzle that was Jace Rylan. A sister with children, spoken of in past tense, suggesting loss or estrangement. But before Mara could ask follow-up questions, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared around the corner of the building, carrying a covered casserole dish and wearing the determined expression of someone on a mission. "Mara, mija, I brought dinner." She stopped, short when she noticed Jace, taking in his presence in the garden with obvious approval. "And you must be the young man who's been helping around here." "Yes, ma'am, Jace Rylan." He stood respectfully, unconsciously straightening his posture in the way that suggested military training and good upbringing. "Maria Rodriguez. I live next." Odor to Mara. She studied him with the frank assessment of someone who had appointed herself as Mara's protector. "You're the one who's been making sure she eats properly, among other things." "Good. She's too stubborn to take care of herself properly, and that baby needs proper nutrition." Mrs. Rodriguez transferred her attention to the ultrasound photos in Jace's hands. "Is that my little granddaughter?" The casual assumption of familial relationship made Mara's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Mrs. Rodriguez had been referring to the baby as her grandchild since the pregnancy became visible, filling a role that would have belonged to Tom's mother if she hadn't died 5 years earlier. "It's a girl," Mara confirmed. "Dr. Martinez says everything looks perfect." "Of course it does. I've been lighting candles for both of you every Sunday." Mrs. Rodriguez beamed with satisfaction, as if her prayers had personally ensured the baby's health. A little girl. Tom would have been so happy. The mention of her husband in front of Jace created a moment of awkward silence, but he handled it with the same grace he brought to other difficult situations. "He would have been proud," Jace agreed quietly. "Any father would be." "You knew Tom?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked with interest. "No, ma'am, but I know Mara and any man who earned her. Love must have been exceptional." It was perfectly diplomatic and genuinely felt, acknowledging Tom's importance without diminishing his own growing place in Mara's life. Mrs. Rodriguez's expression suggested she approved of both the sentiment and the man expressing it. "You should join us for dinner," she announced, making the decision for everyone involved. "I made enough enchiladas to feed half the county, and Mara needs to celebrate this good news properly." They ate in Mara's kitchen. The three of them gathered around the small table while Mrs. Rodriguez regaled them with stories of her own children and grandchildren. Jace listened with the respectful attention that seemed to come naturally to him, asking thoughtful questions and laughing at the appropriate moments. Watching him interact with her surrogate grandmother, Mara felt something settle into place that she hadn't realized was missing. "You have good hands," Mrs. Rodriguez observed, noting the careful way Jace handled the delicate pottery she had brought the enchiladas in. "My late husband was the same way. Could fix anything, build anything, never broke a dish in 40 years of marriage. My grandfather taught me that tools and dishes deserve the same respect you'd show people," Jace replied. "Treat them carelessly, and they'll fail you when you need them most. Smart man, your grandfather. Yes, ma'am, the smartest man I ever knew." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, insisting on leaving the leftover enchiladas despite Mara's protests, they cleaned the dishes together in comfortable silence. It was such an ordinary domestic scene that Mara found herself imagining what it would be like if this became routine. Sharing meals, cleaning up together, discussing the small details of daily life that mattered more than grand gestures. "She likes you," Mara observed, noting how Mrs. Rodriguez had made a point of including Jace in her plans for baby preparations. "She's protective of you. I respect that. She's also subtle as a brick to the face when she's matchmaking." Jace's hands stilled in the process of drying a plate. Is that what she was doing? Among other things. Mara focused on scrubbing a stubborn spot on the casserole dish, avoiding eye contact. "She's decided you're good for me. And what do you think?" The question hung in the air between them. Loaded with implications, neither of them had been brave enough to address directly. Mara could feel the weight of his attention, the careful stillness that suggested her answer mattered more than casual curiosity would warrant. "I think," she said slowly, "that 3 weeks ago I was barely managing to take care of myself, and now I feel like I might actually be capable of taking care of a baby. I think having you here has made everything feel more manageable, more hopeful." "That's not what I asked." "I know." She rinsed the dish and handed it to him, their fingers brushing in the transfer. "I think you're good for me, Jace. I think you're good for both of us. And that scares me more than I want to admit." "Why?" "Because caring about someone means risking losing them. And I'm not sure I'm strong enough to survive that kind of loss again." Jace set down the dish and turned to face her fully, his expression serious but gentle. "I can't promise you'll never lose me, Mara. Nobody can make that promise, but I can promise you that I'm not going anywhere by choice. Whatever brought me here, whatever mistakes I made before, this feels like where I'm supposed to be." It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something almost as valuable. A promise of intention, of commitment to building something together, rather than simply accepting whatever circumstances offered. Looking into his eyes, Mara felt the last of her resistance crumble, replaced by something that felt dangerously like hope. The phone call came at 4:17 in the morning, jolting Mara from the light sleep that had become her norm during the 3rd trimester. She reached for her cell phone automatically, expecting a medical emergency or Dr. Vasquez calling about a patient crisis. Instead, she heard the electronic buzz of a connection that carried no voice, just the faint background noise of an open line. "Hello?" she said, sitting up in bed despite the protest from her aching back. Silence. Then, just before she would have hung up, a man's voice spoke in measured tones that carried the weight of deliberate menace. "Tell your friend we know where he is." The line went dead, leaving Mara staring at her phone in the darkness of her bedroom, Her heart hammered against her ribs as the implications of the call settled into her consciousness. Jace's past hadn't just followed him to Santa Rosa, it had found him, and now it knew about her. She threw on clothes and drove to the clinic, her hands shaking on the steering wheel as she tried to process what the call meant. The roads were empty at this hour, the desert landscape painted silver by moonlight. But she found herself checking the rearview mirror constantly, looking for headlights that might be following her. The clinic sat in darkness, but she could see light seeping around the edges of the upstairs windows. Jace was awake, probably reading or working on one of his whittling projects. She climbed the stairs as quietly as possible, but he met her at the door before she could knock, already dressed and alert. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, taking in her appearance and the hour of her arrival. "Someone called me," she said, stepping into the small apartment. "A man. He said to tell you they know where you are." Jace's expression went through several changes: surprise, concern, and finally a grim resignation that suggested he had been expecting this moment. He moved to the window and peered through the blinds at the parking lot below, his body tense with the coiled alertness of someone preparing for trouble. Did he say anything else? No, just that one message, then he hung up. Mara sank into the room's single chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. "Jace, who are these people? What do they want from you?" For a long moment he didn't answer. His attention, he focused on systematically checking each window and evaluating potential threats. Then he pulled a cheap prepaid cell phone from his jacket pocket, a phone she had never seen before, and stared at it as if it were a coiled snake. "This has been ringing for the past hour," he said quietly. "I haven't answered it because I knew what it would mean." What would it mean? That my time here is over. That I have to choose between staying and putting you in danger, or leaving, and facing whatever consequences I've been running from. The stark simplicity of his statement hit her like a physical blow. In less than 5 minutes, their carefully constructed sense of security had crumbled, replaced by the reality that Jace's presence carried risks she hadn't fully understood. "Tell me what you did," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "All of it. I need to know what we're dealing with." Jace sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap phone still in his hands, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked defeated. "I worked for a man named Vincent Cordova, rich businessman, legitimate on the surface, but most of his money comes from things that wouldn't pass close inspection." "What kind of things?" "Money laundering mostly, some drug trafficking, some gun running, but nothing he could be directly connected to. He's smart, careful, and he surrounds himself with people who are willing to take the fall if things go wrong." "And you were one of those people?" "I managed logistics for his legitimate businesses, but I knew what the real money was funding. I told myself I was just doing transportation and inventory, that I wasn't directly involved in anything illegal." His laugh held no humor. "Amazing how creative you can get with rationalizations when the money's good enough." Mara waited, sensing. There was more to the story. "My sister Elena was sick," Jace continued. "Lung cancer, stage 4. The treatments weren't covered by her insurance, and she couldn't afford them on her teacher's salary. I started skimming money from Cordova's operations, just small amounts that wouldn't be noticed, telling myself I'd pay it back when Elena got better. But she didn't get better. She died 3 months ago, and by then, I'd taken close to $150,000. He looked directly at her, his expression carrying the weight of guilt and regret. "I was going to return the money after her funeral, come clean, and accept whatever punishment Cordova decided I deserved. But his accountants discovered the theft before I could confess. So you ran. I ran. Took the money and disappeared, thinking I could stay ahead of them long enough to figure out a solution." He gestured toward his bandaged side. "Turns out I wasn't as clever as I thought." The pieces of the puzzle finally assembled themselves into a complete picture. Jace wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense, but he had stolen a significant amount of money from dangerous people who wouldn't forgive the transgression regardless of his motivations. Where's the money now? Mara asked. Hidden, safe but accessible if I need it. How much of it is left? Most of it. I've been living on cash I had saved before everything fell apart, trying not to touch what I stole. Mara processed this information, weighing the implications against everything she had learned about Jace's character over the past month. You could have disappeared completely, changed your name, started over somewhere they'd never find you. I could have, but you stayed here instead. I stayed here because I found something worth more than money and worth more than safety. His voice was quiet but firm. I stayed because I'd rather face whatever's coming than spend the rest of my life running from the possibility of building a real life with you. The admission hung between them, loaded with significance that transcended their current crisis. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the complexity of their situation, Jace had chosen to risk his safety for the possibility of a future together. What do they want? She asked. The money back or something more? Cordova doesn't just want the money. He wants to make an example, to show other people what happens when you steal from him. In his world, reputation is everything, which means they won't be satisfied with just getting their money back. They'll want me to pay a price that discourages anyone else from trying the same thing. The implications of his words settled over them like a cold weight. These weren't people who would be satisfied with financial restitution. They wanted revenge, and they were willing to involve innocent people to get it. There's something else, Jace said, his voice even quieter. If they know about you, if they're willing to call you directly, it means they're planning to use you as leverage. They'll threaten to hurt you and the baby to force me to surrender. Then we call the police. Sheriff Cardenas, the FBI, whoever, handles this kind of thing. And tell them what? That I stole money from people who can't be legally connected to any crimes. Cordova's entire operation is designed to be untouchable through normal legal channels. Mara felt the walls of their carefully constructed sanctuary closing in around them. Everything they had built together over the past month, the sense of safety, the growing intimacy, the hope for a shared future, was being threatened by forces beyond their control. So what do we do? She asked. Jace stood and moved to the window again, scanning the horizon as if he could see their pursuers approaching across the desert. I have to leave. Tonight, before they get here. If I'm gone, you're no longer useful to them as leverage. And go where? I don't know yet. Somewhere far enough away that they'll follow me instead of staying here to wait for me to come back. That's not a plan. That's just more running. It's the only way to keep you safe. Mara struggled to her feet, her pregnancy making quick movements. Difficult, but determination overriding physical limitations. No, I won't let you run again, and I won't let them drive you away from the life you're trying to build. Mara, you don't understand what these people are capable of. I understand that running didn't work before, and it won't work now. I understand that I'm not going to let fear make my decisions for me. She moved to stand beside him at the window, her hand finding his arm. And I understand that if we're going to face this, we're going to face it together. The cheap phone in Jace's hand began to ring, its electronic tone harsh in the quiet of the small apartment. They both stared at it as if it were a bomb, counting down to detonation, knowing that answering it would change everything, but that ignoring it would only delay the inevitable. The phone stopped ringing just as Jace reached for it, leaving them in a silence that felt more ominous than any conversation could have been. Outside, the desert dawn was beginning to paint the sky in pale shades of amber and rose, but the beauty of the sunrise felt incongruous with the gravity of their situation. They're playing games, Jace said, staring at the silent phone. Psychological pressure. They want me off balance and afraid before they make their real move. How long do we have? Hard to say. Could be hours, could be days. Depends on how much they want to draw this out. He set the phone on the small table and turned to face her fully. Mara, there's more you need to know. Things I should have told you before this got so complicated. She braced herself for another revelation, wondering what additional secrets could make their situation worse than it already was. Show me, she said simply. Jace moved to the small closet and retrieved an old duffel bag she had assumed contained his few personal belongings. Instead, when he unzipped it, she saw neat stacks of currency secured with rubber bands. More money than she had ever seen in one place. $137,000, he said, his voice matter-of-fact, despite the enormity of what he was revealing. What's left of what I took from Cordova's operation. Mara stared at the money, trying to process the reality of having this much cash in the same small room where she had been sleeping peacefully just hours earlier. It was enough money to solve every financial problem she faced, enough to ensure her daughter's security for years to come, but it was also evidence of a federal crime and the reason dangerous people were hunting the man she had come to love. "You've been carrying this around for weeks," she said, the implications slowly sinking in. "I've been carrying it around for months. Every time I moved, every motel room, every temporary job, this bag came with me." Jace sat heavily in the chair she had vacated. "It's been like carrying my sister's ghost and my own guilt wherever I go." "Tell me about her, about Elena." For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his expression softened, with a mixture of love and grief that reminded her of her own feelings about Tom. "She was 3 years older than me, and the best person I've ever known. Became a teacher because she wanted to make a difference in kids' lives, never made much money but never complained about it. When our parents died, she's the one who made sure I finished high school, who encouraged me to join the army, who wrote me letters every week when I was deployed. She sounds wonderful." She was, and when she got sick, when the doctor said the experimental treatments might give her a few more months, but insurance wouldn't cover them, he shook his head. "I couldn't let her die knowing I had the means to help, but chose not to use them. So you started taking money from Cordova, a little at a time, 5,000 here, 10,000 there. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd find a way to pay it back. Elena didn't even know where the money was coming from. I told her I'd taken out loans, sold some investments. Did the treatments help? For a while. She had 6 extra months, good months where she could travel a little, spend time with her kids, finish some projects she'd been working on. She died peacefully, surrounded by family, instead of wasting away in a charity ward." His voice carried no regret about the choice itself, only about the consequences. "Those 6 months were worth everything I've gone through since." Mara moved to sit on the bed beside him, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close as to crowd him while he worked through painful memories. "What was her last name?" she asked. "Your sister's?" "Vasquez. Elena Vasquez." The name hit Mara like a physical blow, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. "Elena Vasquez, the teacher who died of cancer 3 months ago in Colorado Springs." Jace's head snapped up, his expression shocked. "You knew her." "Dr. Vasquez. Elena here at the clinic. She's been corresponding with a teacher in Colorado who had the same name. They were working on some kind of curriculum project together." Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. "She got a letter about Elena's death, and she was heartbroken. Said she felt like she'd lost a sister she'd never met in person. The coincidence was so unlikely, so perfectly orchestrated by whatever forces governed human connection, that neither of them could speak. For several minutes, Jace's sister, the woman whose medical bills had set this entire chain of events in motion, had been known and mourned by the doctor who was now treating her brother. "She kept the letter," Mara said finally. "Dr. Vasquez. She has it in her desk, along with some of the lesson plans Elena had sent her. She said Elena was one of the most dedicated teachers she'd ever encountered, even while she was sick. Elena would have loved that. Knowing her work mattered to someone she'd never met." Jace wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not bothering to hide his emotional response. "She always said teaching was about planting seeds you might never see grow. Dr. Vasquez is going to want to meet you. When she finds out who you are, when she realizes I'm the reason Elena had those extra months, or when she realizes I'm a criminal who stole money to pay for treatments. Both, I think, but mostly the first one. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, casting longer shadows through the small windows. The duffel bag of money sat open between them like a confession, its contents representing both the depth of Jace's love for his sister and the magnitude of the trouble it had brought to their doorstep. "There's something else I need to tell you," Jace said eventually, "about why I stayed here, about what this place has meant to me. You don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because if we're going to face whatever comes next together, you need to understand exactly who you're choosing to stand with." Mara waited, sensing that this confession would be different from the others, more personal and therefore more difficult. "When I first woke up in your clinic, when you were taking care of me, I thought you were an angel, literally. I'd lost so much blood, been running for so long, that when I opened my eyes and saw this beautiful pregnant woman bending over me, with gentle hands and kind eyes, I thought I'd died and somehow made it to heaven despite everything I'd done wrong." "Jace, let me finish. When I realized I was still alive, when I understood that you'd saved my life for no reason other than it was the right thing to do, I started to believe that maybe redemption was possible. Maybe I could find a way to honor Elena's memory that didn't involve running for the rest of my life." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both intimate and protective. "I fell in love with you before I knew your name," he continued. "I fell in love with your compassion, your strength, your determination. To build something good, even when everything around you was falling apart. And then I got to know you, really know you, and I realized that what I felt initially was just the beginning." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I love you, Mara. I love your stubbornness and your kindness, and the way you talk to your daughter when you think nobody's listening. I love that you see the best in people even when they can't see it in themselves. And I love that you're brave enough to fight for what matters, even when the odds are stacked against you." The declaration hung between them, simple and profound, carrying the weight of everything they had built together and everything they stood to lose. "I love you too," she said, the words coming more easily than she had expected. "I love that you fixed our supply closet and learned Mrs. Rodriguez's enchilada recipe and carved a horse for a baby you'd never met. I love that you honor my husband's memory without feeling threatened by it, and that you make me feel like I can be a good mother even when I'm terrified of failing. So, what do we do now?" Mara looked at the bag of money, then at the man who had carried it across half the country in search of redemption, and finally at the ultrasound photo of her daughter taped to the small mirror above the sink. "Now we stop running," she said. "We figure out how to make this right, how to protect our family, and how to give that money back to people who can use it for something good." "Our family?" "You, me, and her," Mara said, touching her belly. "If you're willing to take on a ready-made family with a complicated history and uncertain future." "I can't think of anything I want more." Outside, a car engine started in the parking lot, and they both tensed until they recognized the familiar sound of Dr. Vasquez's sedan arriving for the morning shift. Normal life was continuing around them, even as their world balanced on the edge of transformation. "We should tell her," Mara said, "about Elena, about everything. She deserves to know, and we're going to need all the help we can get." Jace nodded, closing the duffel bag, but leaving it on the table where its presence served as a reminder of the choices that had brought them to this moment. "Together?" he asked. "Everything from now on," Mara replied. "Together." Dr. Elena Vasquez was reviewing patient files when Mara and Jace descended the stairs together, their serious expressions immediately capturing her attention. She had learned to read the subtle signs of crisis during her 30 years of medical practice, and something in their bearing suggested this conversation would be significant. "We need to talk," Mara said without preamble, "about Elena Vasquez in Colorado Springs, about the teacher who died 3 months ago." Elena's pen stopped moving across the chart she was updating. "What about her?" Jace stepped forward, his posture respectful but determined. "She was my sister," The simple statement landed with the force of revelation, and Elena's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning understanding that brought tears to her eyes. She set down her pen with trembling hands and studied Jace's face as if searching for familiar features. "Elena Vasquez was your sister," she repeated slowly. "The teacher who was working on the literacy curriculum for rural schools." "Yes, ma'am. The woman who sent me those beautiful lesson plans even while she was undergoing cancer treatment." "That sounds like Elena." Dr. Vasquez rose from her chair and moved closer, her medical training warring with her emotional response. "She wrote to me about her brother, said he was a good man who had made some difficult choices to help her with medical expenses. Said she was worried about him but proud of his sacrifice." Jace's composure cracked slightly at this revelation. "She knew? She figured it out." "Elena was brilliant, Jace. She put together the timing of the money appearing with changes in your behavior, your increased stress levels when you visited. In her last letter, she said she was praying that God would show you a path to forgiveness and peace." The weight of this new information settled over them all. Elena had known about her brother's theft, had understood the price he was paying for her extra months of life, and had chosen to focus her final energies on hoping for his redemption rather than on guilt about his sacrifice. "She never said anything to me," Jace said quietly. "Never made me feel like she blamed me for the situation I'd created, because she didn't blame you. She told me once that love makes people do extraordinary things, sometimes foolish things, but that the intent behind the action matters as much as the action itself." Dr. Vasquez moved to her desk and retrieved a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. "She sent me this in her final package. Said it was for her brother, if I ever had the chance to give it to him." Inside the box, nestled in faded tissue paper, was a hand-carved wooden cross, obviously crafted with the same skill and attention to detail that Jace brought to his whittling. Beside it lay a folded letter, the paper soft with age and careful handling. "She made this?" Jace asked, accepting the cross with reverent hands. "She learned woodworking from your grandfather, just like you did. Said it helped her think through problems and stay connected to family traditions." Dr. Vasquez gestured toward the letter. "She asked me to give you that if our paths ever crossed." With trembling fingers, Jace unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting of the sister he had loved and lost. As he read, his expression moved through several emotions: surprise, grief, relief, and finally something that looked like peace. "What does it say?" Mara asked gently. "She forgives me," Jace said, his voice thick with emotion. "She says the money gave her time to finish her work, to say goodbye properly, to see her children graduate and start their own lives. She says she's grateful for the sacrifice, but she doesn't want me to spend the rest of my life paying for a choice that was motivated by love." "That sounds like Elena," Dr. Vasquez agreed. "She was always more concerned about other people's welfare than her own." "There's more." Jace continued reading, his expression growing more complex. "She says she found out how I got the money, who I took it from. She did research, Elena, trying to understand what kind of people I was involved with and Vincent Cordova's organization launders money for human trafficking operations. Drug cartels, yes, but also people who kidnap children and sell them across international borders." Jace's voice was flat with horror. "Elena writes that some of the money I stole was directly connected to those operations. She says returning it to Cordova would be putting it back into the hands of people who destroy innocent lives." The revelation recontextualized everything they thought they knew about the situation. The money in Jace's duffel bag wasn't just stolen funds. It was blood money, taken from an organization that profited from human suffering on a scale they had never imagined. "What else does the letter say?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "She suggests that the money should go to organizations that fight against human trafficking, that help victims rebuild their lives." She researched specific charities, legitimate groups that could use the funds to do real good. Jace looked up from the letter, his expression transformed. She turned my mistake into a mission. That's Elena, Dr. Vasquez said with a watery smile, always finding ways to transform problems into solutions. Mara processed this new information, understanding that it changed everything about their situation. If Cordova's money is connected to human trafficking, if the authorities knew about it, it would give them leverage against his entire operation. Jace finished. Elena thought of that too. She includes contact information for an FBI agent who specializes in financial crimes related to human trafficking. Someone who might be interested in a witness willing to testify about Cordova's money laundering operations. You could be a witness, Dr. Vasquez said, understanding the implications immediately. Instead of a fugitive, you could be someone helping to bring down a criminal organization. It's not that simple. Cordova's people are already here, already making threats. Even if the FBI could eventually build a case, there's no guarantee they could protect us in the meantime. Then we need to be smart about this, Mara said, her mind already working through possibilities. We need to get the authorities involved, but we need to do it in a way that ensures our safety. Dr. Vasquez moved to the window and peered out at the parking lot, her expression thoughtful. There's something else to consider. If Cordova's people are watching the clinic, they'll see any official vehicles that show up here. We need a way to make contact without drawing attention. Sheriff Cardenas, Mara suggested. He's local, trustworthy, and his presence here wouldn't seem unusual. He could reach out to federal authorities without it being obvious what's happening. That could work, Jace agreed. But we need to assume they're monitoring communications too. Phone calls, emails, anything electronic could be intercepted. Then we do this the old-fashioned way, Dr. Vasquez said with determination. Face with people we trust, building a network of support before we make any official moves. As they developed their strategy, the wooden cross Elena had carved remained on the desk between them, its presence serving as a reminder that love could, indeed, transform mistakes into missions, that redemption was possible even in the darkest circumstances. There's one more thing, Jace said, rereading a section of his sister's letter. Elena discovered that some of Cordova's operations are based in New Mexico. If the FBI could connect the money I took to specific crimes committed in this state, they'd have jurisdiction to move immediately rather than waiting for a complex interstate investigation. What kind of operations? A truck stop on I-40, about 60 miles from here. According to Elena's research, it's a transfer point for girls being moved from Mexico to buyers in the eastern United States. Jace's jaw tightened with controlled anger. She includes evidence, transaction records, license plate numbers, everything she managed to gather before she died. The scope of Elena's final project was staggering. While battling cancer and knowing her time was limited, she had conducted an investigation that could potentially save dozens of innocent lives while providing her brother with a path to redemption. She loved you very much, Dr. Vasquez said. Quietly, yes, she did. And now I understand what she wanted me to do with that love. Jace carefully refolded the letter and placed it back in the wooden box alongside the cross. She wanted me to use my guilt and my knowledge to make sure other families don't go through what hers did. Are you ready for that? Mara asked. Ready? To testify against Cordova? To put yourself in the middle of a federal investigation? I'm ready to stop running and start fighting, for Elena's memory, for justice, and for the family we're trying to build together. Outside, a car pulled into the parking lot. Not Dr. Vasquez's familiar sedan or any of the vehicles they recognized from the community. A black SUV with tinted windows, moving slowly as if the occupants were surveying the area. They're here, Jace said, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. Time to find out if we're as smart as we think we are, or if we've just run out of places to hide. The SUV parked at the far edge of the lot, its engine still running, its occupants invisible behind the dark glass. Whatever came next would determine whether Elena's final gift to her brother would lead to redemption or tragedy. The black SUV remained motionless in the parking lot for 17 minutes, its presence as ominous as storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Through the clinic's front windows, they could see two figures in the front seats, their attention focused on the building, but their intentions unclear. Then, without warning, the vehicle pulled away, disappearing down Highway 54 toward town. "Reconnaissance," Jace said grimly. "They're mapping out the area, figuring out our routines, looking for the best approach." Dr. Vasquez moved to her desk and opened the bottom drawer, retrieving a small lockbox that Mara had never seen before. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, lay a compact pistol, Tom's service weapon from his days as a volunteer deputy before he became a firefighter. "Tom asked me to keep this here after he left law enforcement," Dr. Vasquez explained, noting Mara's surprised expression. "Said medical facilities should have some form of protection, especially during overnight shifts in remote areas." Mara stared at the gun, her emotions complicated by the sight of something that had once belonged to her husband now being prepared for use in protecting the new life she was building. Tom had been meticulous about firearm safety, had taught her basic handling procedures, but she had never imagined circumstances where that knowledge might become relevant. "Do you know how to use it?" Jace asked Dr. Vasquez. "Tom insisted on teaching me proper handling and safety procedures. I'm not an expert, but I'm competent enough for close-range defensive purposes." She checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, her medical hands steady despite the gravity of the situation. "The question is whether we'll need it. We need to assume we will," Jace replied. "Cordova's people don't make social calls." While Dr. Vasquez secured the weapon in a more accessible location, Mara called Sheriff Cardenas on the clinic's landline, using carefully chosen words to request his presence without specifying the nature of the emergency. Within 20 minutes, his patrol car pulled into the lot, his arrival looking routine rather than urgent. "What's the situation?" he asked, once they had briefed him on the basics. Jace's identity, the stolen money, and the human trafficking connection revealed in Elena's letter. "We need federal assistance, but we need it in a way that doesn't paint a target on the clinic," Mara explained. "These people have already demonstrated they're willing to involve innocent parties." Sheriff Cardenas studied Elena's research materials, with the careful attention of someone who understood both the legal implications and the immediate dangers. "This is solid intelligence. The FBI will definitely want to pursue this, especially if Jace is willing to testify." "I am," Jace said without hesitation. "But I need assurance that Mara and the baby will be protected during any legal proceedings." "That can be arranged, but it's going to take time to set up properly. Witness protection, safe houses, the whole process." Cardenas looked around the clinic's sparse facilities. "Meanwhile, you're sitting ducks out here." "Then we don't sit," Dr. Vasquez said with quiet determination. "We move proactively." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we don't wait for them to make the first move. We know they're here, we know what they want, and we know they'll use intimidation and violence to get it. Instead of reacting to their timeline, we create our own." Jace looked at her with newfound respect. "You want to draw them out. I want to control the engagement. Choose the time, place, and circumstances, instead of letting them surprise us when we're least prepared." It was a risky strategy, but it had the advantage of initiative. Rather than hiding and hoping federal authorities could respond quickly, enough they would force a confrontation on their own terms. "How do we do that?" Mara asked. "We give them what they think they want," Jace said, understanding Dr. Vasquez's logic. "We let them believe they have the upper hand, that they've cornered us, and then we spring our own trap." Sheriff Cardenas nodded slowly. "If we coordinate properly, if we have backup in place and communications established, it could work. But the risks exist whether we're proactive or reactive," Dr. Vasquez pointed out. "At least this where we have some control over variables. They spent the next 2 hours developing a detailed plan. Jace would make contact with Cordova's people, agreeing to meet them at a location of their choosing, but insisting on terms that would actually serve their purposes. Sheriff Cardenas would coordinate with federal agents, ensuring backup was positioned, but concealed. The clinic would serve as a fallback position, with predetermined escape routes and defensive preparations. "What about the money?" Mara asked as they finalized details. "The money stays here, secured until we know the outcome," Jace decided. "If something goes wrong, if this plan fails, at least Elena's research and the evidence can still reach the proper authorities. And if something goes wrong with you?" The question came out more emotional than Mara had intended, betraying the depth of her fear for his safety. "Then you take that money and you use it exactly the way Elena suggested. You make sure it goes to people who fight against the kind of evil that created it in the first place." "Jace, promise me, Mara. Promise me that no matter what happens tonight, Elena's mission continues." The weight of his request settled over her like a mantle of responsibility. He wasn't just asking her to dispose of stolen money. He was asking her to carry forward his sister's final wish, to transform tragedy into purpose. "I promise," she said. "But you're going to be there to help me do it." At sunset, Jace's prepaid phone rang with the call they had been expecting. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and utterly without warmth. Someone accustomed to delivering ultimatums and expecting compliance. "Mr. Rylan, I believe you have something that belongs to my employer. I believe your employer has been looking for me. Indeed, Mr. Cordova is prepared to be reasonable about this situation, provided you're willing to be reasonable as well." What does reasonable look like? A simple exchange. You return what you took, along with appropriate interest for the inconvenience you've caused, and Mr. Cordova will consider the matter resolved. And if I refuse, then we'll be forced to explore alternative methods of persuasion. I understand you've become attached to certain people in your current location. It would be unfortunate if they were to experience consequences for your poor judgment. The threat was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing weather. But its implications were clear. Cordova's people were prepared to harm innocent parties to achieve their objectives. "Where and when?" Jace asked. "There's an abandoned gas station on Route 285, about 15 miles south of your current location. Midnight. Come alone. Bring everything you took. And this can all be finished tonight." "How do I know you'll honor the agreement?" "You don't. But you know what will happen if you don't show up." The line went dead, leaving them with 5 hours to execute their plan. The abandoned gas station was familiar to all of them, a relic from the days when Route 285 carried more traffic now, serving as a landmark for locals and nothing more. Its isolation made it perfect for Cordova's purposes, but that same isolation could work in their favor if they prepared properly. "Are you sure about this?" Sheriff Cardenas asked as they made final preparations. "No," Jace admitted, "but I'm sure that running hasn't worked, and I'm sure that hiding won't protect the people I care about. Sometimes the only way forward is through the danger, not around it." As night fell over the desert, they gathered their courage and their resources, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether Elena's final gift would lead to redemption or tragedy. The stars emerged one by one in the clear sky, silent witnesses to the drama about to unfold in the darkness below. At 10:30 that evening, with 90 minutes remaining before the confrontation, Mara sat alone in her bedroom, staring at the simple gold wedding band that had encircled her finger for 3 years. The ring had become a talisman during the months of widowhood, a physical reminder of promises made and love shared. But tonight it felt like a weight that was holding her back from the life she needed to embrace. Tom's voice seemed to echo in her memory, words from their wedding vows about supporting each other through all of life's challenges, about building a future based on trust and mutual protection. He had been speaking about their life together, But now she wondered if those same principles could apply to the new love she had found with Jace, and to the family they were trying to create. The baby moved restlessly in her womb, as if sensing her emotional turmoil, and Mara placed both hands on her belly, speaking quietly to her daughter. "Your daddy was the bravest man I knew, little one. He ran into burning buildings to save people he'd never met, and he never hesitated when someone needed help. Tonight, the man who wants to be your father is going to do something just as brave, and I have to decide whether I'm brave enough to support him." A soft knock at her door interrupted her reflection. "Come in," she called. Jace entered carefully, his expression showing the controlled tension of someone preparing for battle while trying not to alarm the people he was protecting. He had changed into dark clothing suitable for moving unseen in desert terrain, and she could see the outline of a knife sheathed at his belt, not for offense, but for the practical emergencies that might arise. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling beside her on the bed. "Terrified," she said honestly, "trying to figure out how to be strong enough for this." "You're already strong enough. You've been strong enough since the day I met you." His eyes fell on the wedding ring she was turning nervously around her finger. "That's not something you need to decide tonight, isn't it?" She looked directly at him, seeing past his calm exterior to the fear he was working hard to conceal. "If we're going to build a life together, if we're going to be a family, then I need to decide what that means, whether I'm going to keep holding on to the past or embrace the future we're trying to create. Mara, you don't have to choose between honoring Tom's memory and loving me. That's not how love works. I know that, but this ring—" She held up her hand, studying the simple band in the lamplight. "It's been my anchor through the worst time of my life. Taking it off feels like cutting the last rope that connects me to who I used to be. And who are you now?" It was a profound question, one that required her to look beyond grief and fear, to see the woman she had become through surviving loss and choosing to love again. "I'm someone who saves wounded strangers and falls in love with broken cowboys. I'm someone who's going to raise a daughter to be brave and compassionate and willing to fight for what's right. I'm someone who's learned that love doesn't diminish when you share it with more people. It multiplies." Slowly, deliberately, she slipped the wedding ring from her finger and placed it in the small jewelry box on her nightstand, next to the ultrasound photo of their daughter. "Tom will always be part of our story, but he doesn't get to define our future." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I love you, Jace Rylan. I'm sure that I want to face whatever comes next as your partner, not as someone still married to a ghost." She reached for his hand, noting the calluses and scars that told the story of his life's work. "I'm sure that our daughter deserves parents who are fully committed to building something new together." "Our daughter." He repeated the phrase with wonder, as if testing how it felt to claim paternal connection to a child who wasn't biologically his. "That sounds exactly right." "It does, doesn't it?" They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both understanding that this moment represented a turning point, not just in their immediate crisis, but in their fundamental commitment to each other. When Jace finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of promises being made. "When this is over, when we've dealt with Cordova and his people, I want to do this properly. I want to court you the way you deserve, propose to you with a ring I chose. Specifically for you, plan a wedding that celebrates the family we're building together. And if something goes wrong tonight, nothing's going wrong tonight. We've planned too carefully, have too much backup, and have too much to fight for." But his expression grew more serious. "But if something does go wrong, I need you to know that these past weeks with you have been the best of my life. You've given me hope when I thought I'd lost the right to it, and you've shown me what redemption actually looks like. You've done the same for me. You've helped me remember that I'm allowed to be happy, that building a new life doesn't dishonor the old one." A car horn sounded softly outside. Sheriff Cardenas's signaled that it was time to move to their positions. The federal agents he had contacted were already in place around the abandoned gas station. invisible in the desert darkness, but ready to respond when needed. Dr. Vasquez was securing the clinic and preparing to serve as communication coordinator and medical backup if things went badly. "Time to go," Jace said, standing and checking his watch. "You remember the plan? Stay here with Dr. Vasquez, monitor communications, be ready to implement emergency procedures if something goes wrong." Mara struggled to her feet, her pregnancy making quick movements challenging. "But Jace, if you think I'm going to sit here passively while you walk into danger, I think you're going to do exactly what we agreed on, because you're smart enough to know that our daughter needs at least one parent to survive this night intact. She needs both her parents to survive. Then we'd better make sure that happens." He kissed her then, gently but thoroughly, a kiss that carried both goodbye and promise, both fear and hope. When they broke apart, Mara saw in his eyes the same resolution she remembered from Tom's face on mornings when he left for particularly dangerous calls. The look of a man who had accepted risk as the price of protecting what mattered most. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Both of you." After he left, Mara remained in her bedroom for several more minutes, listening to the sounds of preparation echoing through the house. Low voices coordinating final details, vehicles starting, doors closing with careful quiet. Then she moved to her dresser and retrieved a small hand mirror that had belonged to her grandmother, studying her reflection in its silver surface. The woman looking back at her was different from the frightened widow who had been barely surviving 6 weeks earlier. This woman had purpose beyond mere endurance, love beyond mere memory, and courage beyond mere desperation. This woman was ready to fight for her family, whatever form that family might take. She touched her bare ring finger, noting how strange it felt, but also how right. The pale band of skin, where the wedding ring had rested, would fade with time, replaced by new jewelry that represented new promises. But the strength she had gained from surviving Tom's loss, the wisdom she had earned through choosing to love, again, those would remain, woven into the fabric of whoever she was becoming. From the clinic's main room, she heard Dr. Vasquez calling her name. It was time to take her position, to play her part in the plan they had crafted together. As she moved through the house that had sheltered her grief and witnessed her healing, Mara felt the baby move again. Not restlessly this time, but with the strong, steady rhythm of new life preparing to enter the world. "It's going to be okay, little one," she whispered. "Your parents are going to make sure of that." The abandoned Sinclair station on Route 285 sat like a fossil in the desert night, its broken windows and rusted pumps bearing witness to decades of neglect. Jace arrived at 11:50, 10 minutes early, carrying a duffel bag identical to the one containing Cordova's money, but filled with old newspapers and a few bills on top for authenticity. The real money remained secure at the clinic, along with Elena's research and evidence that could dismantle a human trafficking operation. 2 vehicles were already in position. The black SUV from earlier, parked beside the station's collapsed canopy, and a sedan with Texas plates positioned to block the exit route. Professional positioning, but not as professional as the federal agents Sheriff Cardenas had coordinated, who were invisible in the desert darkness surrounding the location. Jace approached the meeting site with the careful confidence of someone who had served in hostile territory, his senses alert to every sound and movement. The desert air carried the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain, but underneath those natural aromas lay the metallic tang of tension and impending violence. "Mr. Rylan," the voice emerged from the shadow of the station's office, followed by a man in his 40s wearing expensive clothes poorly suited to desert conditions. "Vincent Cordova sends his regards." "I'm sure he does." Jace stopped 20 feet away, keeping the duffel bag visible but not offering to approach closer. "Let's get this over with. Indeed, you have something that belongs to Mr. Cordova, and he wants it back, along with appropriate compensation for the inconvenience you've caused." "Appropriate compensation?" "Interest, Mr. Rylan. The money has Been out of circulation for several months. Mr. Cordova calculates the cost of that interruption at approximately $50,000. It was extortion, pure and simple, but Jace had expected as much. I don't have $50,000 beyond what I took. Then you'll need to be creative about finding it. Perhaps your pregnant friend has resources she could contribute to resolving this situation. The casual mention of Mara sent ice through Jace's veins, confirming that Cordova's people had done thorough reconnaissance and were prepared to escalate beyond the agreed-upon terms. She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this, Mr. Rylan. You've made her part of it by involving her in your problems. The man gestured, and two additional figures emerged from concealment. One from behind the sedan, another from inside the station's ruined office. Bring the money here. Now. Jace complied, approaching slowly while scanning for the positioning of all threats. 3 men visible, possibly more in the vehicles, all of them displaying the controlled alertness of professionals accustomed to violence. But professionals could be predictable, and predictability could be exploited. Open the bag, the spokesman ordered. Jace complied, revealing the newspaper stuffing topped with genuine currency. For a moment the deception held, the poor lighting and careful arrangement disguising the substitution. Then the spokesman reached into the bag, his expression shifting from satisfaction to cold fury as he realized the extent of the deceit. You think this is a game, Mr. Rylan? I think this is a negotiation that just changed terms. Jace stepped back, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. Your boss wants his money back, but he's not going to get it through threats and intimidation. Then how is he going to get it? He's not, because that money is going to be used to undo some of the damage his organization has caused. It's going to help the victims of human trafficking operations, the same operations your boss profits from. The spokesman's expression showed genuine surprise at this revelation. You know about the other business. I know everything. Where the money comes from, where it goes, what it funds. And soon, so will the FBI. The FBI. The man's laugh held no humor. Mr. Rylan, you've been watching too many movies. The FBI can't touch Mr. Cordova. He's too careful, too well-connected, too insulated from direct involvement in operational details. Maybe. But they can touch his money, especially when they have detailed financial records showing exactly how it moves through legitimate businesses to fund illegal operations. Jace allowed himself a small smile. Records compiled by someone who had access to his accounting systems for 2 years. The implications of this statement rippled through the group, and Jace could see them reassessing both the situation and his value as more than just a thief to be eliminated. If he had detailed financial evidence, killing him would solve nothing. The damage would already be done. You're bluffing. Am I? Elena Vasquez was a teacher, but she was also brilliant with numbers and research. Before she died, she spent months documenting exactly how your boss's organization operates, where the money comes from, where it goes, which legitimate businesses serve as fronts for trafficking operations. Elena Vasquez is dead. Yes, she is. But her work lives on, and it's already in the hands of people who can use it to bring down everything Cordova has built. The sound of approaching engines interrupted the standoff. Not the federal backup they had planned, but additional vehicles arriving from the direction of town. The situation was escalating beyond their carefully orchestrated scenario, and Jace felt the first real spike of fear since the confrontation began. Insurance, the spokesman explained, noting Jace's reaction to the new arrivals. Mr. Cordova doesn't like leaving things to chance. 2 more SUVs emerged from the darkness, their headlights creating a harsh artificial daylight around the abandoned station. But instead of additional threats, they disgorged a sight that made Jace's heart soar with relief and pride. Sheriff Cardenas and a team of federal agents, their weapons drawn and their intentions unmistakable. Federal agents, Cardenas's voice. carried clearly across the desert air. Everyone on the ground, hands visible. The confrontation that followed was swift and decisive. Cordova's men, faced with overwhelming force and no escape route, surrendered without resistance. The spokesman, whose name turned out to be Marcus Webb, immediately began negotiating for cooperation in exchange for reduced charges, a development that would provide additional evidence against the trafficking operation. But the most surprising development came when Webb revealed that Vincent Cordova himself was en route to New Mexico, having decided that this situation required his personal attention. The federal agents had less than an hour to prepare for the arrival of one of the most wanted financial criminals in the country, a man who had managed to avoid prosecution for over a decade. "He's coming here?" Agent Sarah Chen, the lead federal investigator, asked with barely concealed excitement. "He left El Paso 2 hours ago," Webb confirmed. "Mr. Cordova doesn't delegate when his reputation is at stake." "And his reputation is at stake because?" "Because word is already spreading through certain circles that his financial security has been compromised. If he doesn't handle this personally, decisively, his entire organization could collapse within weeks." Agent Chen looked at Jace with new respect. "You've managed to draw out someone we've been trying to catch for years. Elena's research was impressive, but having Cordova himself cross state lines to commit additional federal crimes gives us the jurisdiction and evidence we need for a prosecution that will stick." As they prepared for Cordova's arrival, Jace allowed himself a moment to process what was happening. Elena's final gift hadn't just provided a path to personal redemption. It had created an opportunity to strike a devastating blow against an organization that destroyed innocent lives for profit. Her love and wisdom were about to achieve something law enforcement had been unable to accomplish through traditional methods. The radio in Agent Chen's hand crackled with updates from surveillance. Teams positioned along the highway. Cordova's convoy was 20 minutes out, moving at normal speed and showing no signs of awareness that they were driving into a carefully prepared trap. "This is really going to work," Jace said, amazement and gratitude mixing in his voice. "It's going to work because your sister was brilliant, because you were brave enough to trust us, and because sometimes justice requires people to risk everything for what's right." Agent Chen checked her weapon and communication equipment. "Elena would be proud of what you're accomplishing tonight." In the distance, barely visible on the dark highway, headlights appeared like fallen stars moving steadily toward their destiny. Vincent Cordova was coming to collect his money and eliminate a threat to his empire, unaware that he was actually driving toward the end of everything he had built through violence and exploitation. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of cleansing. By morning, the world would be a different place, and the money that had once funded human suffering would begin its transformation into a force for healing and justice. Vincent Cordova arrived at 12:47 in the morning, stepping out of a black Mercedes with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to having problems solved through the application of money and violence. He was smaller than Jace had expected, perhaps 5'8", with silver hair and expensive clothes that suggested wealth and respectability. Only his eyes betrayed the predator beneath the polished exterior, cold, calculating, and utterly without empathy. "Mr. Rylan," Cordova said, surveying the scene with apparent calm despite the obvious federal presence surrounding the abandoned station. "You've made this unnecessarily complicated." "Have I?" Jace stood in the artificial daylight created by the agent's portable lighting equipment, no longer playing the role of desperate fugitive, but instead serving as the key witness in a federal operation. "Seems pretty straightforward to me. You run a criminal organization that profits from human trafficking, and now you're going to prison for it." "Prison?" Cordova's laugh was genuinely amused. "Mr. Rylan, I've been investigated by federal authorities more times than I can count. They've never been able to prove anything because I'm very careful about maintaining appropriate distance between myself and operational details. That was before you had someone with inside knowledge of your financial operations willing to testify. You moved money and managed logistics. You never had access to the information that would be necessary to connect me to anything illegal. No, but Elena did. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Cordova's expression. Elena Vasquez was a school teacher. What could she possibly know about my business? Everything. Jace pulled a folder from his jacket, copies of Elena's, research that he had brought as evidence of their case's strength. She was brilliant with financial analysis, and she spent the last months of her life documenting exactly how your organization works. Bank routing numbers, shell company connections, transaction patterns that tie your legitimate businesses directly to trafficking operations. Agent Chen stepped forward, her badge visible in the harsh lighting. Mr. Cordova, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, money laundering, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. This is absurd. Cordova interrupted, though his composure was beginning to crack. You can't prove I had knowledge of any illegal activities? Actually, we can. Chen gestured toward a table where Elena's research materials were displayed like evidence in a courtroom. Your former employee's sister documented 3 years of financial transactions that create a clear pattern of money laundering in support of human trafficking operations. More importantly, she identified specific instances where you personally authorized transfers that directly funded the purchase and transport of trafficking victims. That's impossible. I never— Route 285 truck stop, 60 miles from here, Jace interrupted. December 15th of last year, you personally authorized a $50,000 transfer to fund facility improvements that were actually used to create better holding areas for trafficking victims. Elena has copies of the authorization emails, bank records, and surveillance photos of the construction work. The color drained from Cordova's face as he realized the extent of Elena's investigation. Those emails were encrypted, sent through secure servers. Your IT security wasn't as good as you thought, Agent Chen said with satisfaction. Elena Vasquez was remarkably resourceful when she was motivated. She was dying, Cordova said, grasping for any argument that might create reasonable doubt. A desperate woman trying to help her criminal brother. She was a hero, Jace said quietly. Someone who used her final months to make sure justice would be served, even if she wouldn't live to see it. The formal arrest process continued with efficient professionalism, but Jace found his attention drifting toward the larger implications of what they had accomplished. Cordova's organization wouldn't disappear overnight, but removing its leadership and freezing its financial assets would save dozens of lives and disrupt trafficking operations across multiple states. What happens to the money now? He asked Agent Chen, as Cordova was secured in one of the federal vehicles. The $137,000 you took becomes evidence until the trial concludes. Then it gets distributed to victim assistance programs according to federal asset forfeiture guidelines. She smiled. Exactly what Elena suggested in her research notes. And the rest of his operation. Webb is already providing information about financial accounts, operational locations, and personnel. Will have enough for dozens of additional arrests and the seizure of millions in assets. Jen's expression grew more serious. This is the kind of breakthrough that happens maybe once in a career. Your sister's work is going to have impact far beyond anything she could have imagined. As federal vehicles began departing with their prisoners, Sheriff Cardenas approached with documents that would officially close this chapter of Jace's life. FBI wants you in protective custody until the trial, but that can be arranged locally if you prefer. No reason you can't continue your life here while helping them build their case. What kind of timeline are we looking at? 18 months, maybe 2 years until trial. But Cordova's going to be held without bail. Flight risk and danger too. The community, And with the evidence Elena compiled, conviction is almost certain. The radio in Cardenas's patrol car crackled with an urgent message from Dr. Vasquez at the clinic. Mara's blood pressure had spiked during the confrontation, and she was experiencing contractions that might indicate premature labor. "Go, Agent," Chen said, noting Jace's immediate shift of attention. "We have everything we need here. Your family needs you now." The drive back to Santa Rosa took 23 minutes that felt like hours, Jace's mind racing through everything that could go wrong with a premature birth at 34 weeks. Dr. Vasquez met them at the clinic entrance, her expression concerned but controlled. "She's stable now," she reported immediately. "The contractions have stopped, blood pressure is normalizing, stress response to the situation, but both she and the baby are fine. Can I see her? She's been asking for you since we got word that..." The operation was successful. Jace found Mara in the clinic's main examination room, connected to monitors that tracked both her vital signs and the baby's heartbeat. Despite her pallor and obvious exhaustion, she smiled when she saw him. Is it over?" she asked. "It's over. Cordova's in custody, his operation is being dismantled, and Elena's research is going to save lives for years to come. And us? We're free. Free to build the life we want, raise our daughter, and honor Elena's memory by making sure the money she helped recover does good in the world." Mara reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Dr. Vasquez has been telling me about Elena's work, about what she accomplished. I wish I could have met her." "You did meet her, in a way. Every lesson plan she shared, every insight about rural education, every moment she spent corresponding with another teacher who shared her passion, that was Elena. You knew her heart, even if you never met her in person. She would have loved seeing what you accomplished tonight, what we accomplished," Jace corrected. "None of this would have been possible without your courage, your willingness to help a stranger, your decision to fight for our future instead of hiding from the past." Dr. Vasquez completed her examination and updated Mara's chart with obvious satisfaction. "Everything looks good. No signs of premature labor. Baby's heartbeat is strong and regular. Blood pressure is back to normal ranges." "So we can go home?" Mara asked. "You can go home, but I want you on modified bed rest for the next week, just to be safe. No stress, plenty of rest, and absolutely no more federal operations." The last instruction was delivered with gentle humor, but underlying seriousness. "I think our federal operation days are behind us," Jace said. "From now on, our biggest excitement is going to be preparing for the baby and figuring out how to manage the clinic's supply inventory." As they prepared to leave, Agent Chen arrived with paperwork that would formalize Jace's cooperation agreement and establish the protection protocols that would ensure their safety during the legal proceedings. The documents represented not just legal arrangements, but the official transformation of Jace from fugitive to protected witness, from criminal to someone helping law enforcement serve justice. "There's one more thing," Chen said, producing a business card and handing it to Mara. "The FBI's Victim Assistance Coordinator wants to discuss setting up a foundation in Elena's name, using the recovered assets to fund programs that help trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. They'd like you both to serve on the board of directors." It was a perfect culmination of Elena's final mission, her love for her brother transformed into a lasting institution that would help heal the damage caused by the very organization he had stolen from. Justice, redemption, and love woven together into something larger than any of them could have achieved alone. As they drove home through the desert night, the crisis finally behind them and their future stretching ahead like an open road, Jace reached over to place his hand on Mara's belly, feeling their daughter move restlessly beneath his palm. "What do you think?" he asked. "Elena Foundation for Trafficking Survivors. I think," Mara said, covering his hand with hers. "Elena would love knowing that her final gift keeps giving to people who need it most." Above them, The stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to the end of one story and the beginning of another, a story of healing, hope, and the transformative power of love to create justice from tragedy. 3 months later, on a crisp January morning, when the desert air carried the scent of snow from distant mountains, Mara woke to the familiar sensation of contractions that felt different from the practice runs her body had been staging for weeks. These were purposeful, regular, and accompanied by a sense of anticipation that told her their daughter had decided it was time to make her entrance into the world. "Jace," she said quietly, reaching over to touch his shoulder as he slept beside her in the bed they now shared without reservation or guilt. He was awake instantly, the alertness of someone whose recent experiences had trained him to respond immediately to any change in circumstances. "Is it time?" "I think so. But not emergency time. Normal. Everything is proceeding as it should time." They had prepared for this moment with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized their approach to rebuilding their lives after Cordova's arrest. The hospital bag was packed and waiting by the door. Dr. Martinez in Roswell was expecting their call, and Mrs. Rodriguez had appointed herself as the official coordinator of community support during the birth. "How are you feeling?" Jace asked, helping her sit up as another contraction built to its peak. "Like I'm about to meet the most important person in my life," Mara said, breathing through the intensity with the techniques they had practiced together. Excited, terrified, ready. The drive to Roswell took 45 minutes, during which Mara's contractions established a steady rhythm that suggested they had timed their departure perfectly. Jace drove with careful attention to the road conditions while maintaining a running commentary designed to keep her spirits up and her mind focused on positive outcomes. "Mrs. Rodriguez finished the baby blanket yesterday," he reported. "She's been knitting every evening for the past month, muttering prayers in Spanish and claiming it's going to be the most beautiful blanket in New Mexico." "Did she use the yarn we picked out together?" "Soft yellow with white trim, exactly like you specified. She said yellow was perfect because it represents sunshine and new beginnings." The blanket had become something of a community project, with Mrs. Rodriguez recruiting several other women from church to help with the intricate pattern she had chosen. Each stitch represented not just craftsmanship, but also the web of support that had formed around their growing family, the network of relationships that would help raise their daughter with love and wisdom. At the hospital, they were quickly settled into a private room where Dr. Martinez confirmed that labor was progressing normally and their daughter would likely arrive sometime that afternoon. The next several hours passed in a blur of medical monitoring, breathing exercises, and quiet conversations about the future they were about to begin in earnest. "Have you thought any more about names?" Jace asked during a lull between contractions. "I keep coming back to Hope," Mara said. "Hope Elena Rylan, if you're willing to let her carry your name." Hope Elena. He tested the combination, his expression showing both surprise and deep emotion. "You want to name her after my sister? I want to name her after the woman whose love made this possible." Elena's research didn't just save us from Cordova, it showed us what love looks like when it refuses to give up, even in the face of death. The name felt perfect, honoring both the hope that had sustained them through crisis and the woman whose final gift had transformed tragedy into triumph. Hope Elena would grow up knowing she was named for qualities that had defined the best moments of human courage and compassion. "Hope Elena Rylan," Jace repeated, leaning down to kiss Mara's forehead. "She's going to love hearing the story of how she got her names. Both stories. Hope because we found hope in each other when we thought it was lost forever. Elena because sometimes love requires sacrificing everything to protect the people who matter most." Dr. Martinez returned with updates that indicated the baby was ready to make her appearance, and the next hour passed in the focused intensity of active labor. When Hope Elena finally arrived at 3:17 that afternoon, she announced her presence with strong cries that filled the delivery room with the sound of new life triumphant. "She's perfect," Dr. Martinez announced, placing the baby on Mara's chest for their first skin-to-skin contact. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, 19 inches long, and absolutely beautiful. Mara looked down at her daughter, their daughter, and felt something settle into place that she hadn't realized had been missing. Hope's tiny face was red and wrinkled from the effort of birth, but her eyes were alert and focused, as if she was already trying to understand the world she had just entered. "Hello, baby girl," Mara whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Jace stood beside the bed, his expression cycling through wonder, joy, and protective love as he studied the child who would call him father. When Hope wrapped her tiny fingers around one of his, the connection was immediate and profound, not the gradual bonding that sometimes develops between step-parents and children, but the instant recognition of family. "She's incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at her grip. She's going to be strong." "She's going to need to be strong," Mara replied. "She's going to grow up knowing that her parents fought for justice, that her namesake died helping other people, and that love sometimes requires courage most people never have to find." Over the next few hours, a steady stream of visitors arrived to meet Hope Elena and celebrate her safe arrival. Mrs. Rodriguez came first, bearing the promised blanket and enough food to feed the entire maternity ward. Dr. Vasquez arrived with flowers and the news that the Elena Foundation had received its official non-profit status, meaning the recovered money could begin flowing to trafficking survivor programs within weeks. Sheriff Cardenas stopped by with congratulations and the update that Vincent Cordova's trial date had been set for October, giving them several months to enjoy their new family before Jace would need to testify. Agent Chen sent flowers and a card promising that federal protection would continue seamlessly through the transition to parenthood. "Look at all these people who love you already," Mara told Hope as she nursed for the first time. "You're going to grow up surrounded by the kind of community most children never experience." "She's going to grow up knowing that family isn't just about blood relationships," Jace added. "It's about the people who choose to love you, protect you, and help you become the best version of yourself." As evening approached and the visitors departed, leaving the three of them alone in the quiet hospital room, Mara felt the profound contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. 6 months earlier, she had been a grieving widow, barely surviving from day to day. Now she was a mother, a partner in building something meaningful, and a participant in work that would help heal some of the world's deepest wounds. "What are you thinking about?" Jace asked, noting her contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how strange life is, how the worst things that happen to us can sometimes lead to the best things, if we're brave enough to stay open to possibilities we'd never imagined, like wounded cowboys showing up at clinic doors during thunderstorms. Exactly like that." She shifted Hope to a more comfortable position, marveling at how natural motherhood felt despite her fears about being unprepared. And like dying sisters who love their brothers enough to spend their final months creating roadmaps to redemption. "Elena would have loved her," Jace said, gently touching Hope's cheek with one finger. "She always said children were proof that God still believed in second chances." "Then I guess Hope Elena is proof that some second chances are worth waiting for." Outside their window, the New Mexico sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, the same colors that had welcomed Jace to their community months earlier when he was running from his past and unsure of his future. Now those colors seemed like a benediction, a promise that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to build something beautiful from the foundation of love they had discovered in each other. Hope stirred in her mother's arms, making the small sounds of a baby adjusting to life outside the womb, and both parents felt the shift in their priorities that comes with becoming responsible for someone completely dependent on their care and protection. "Ready for the real adventure to begin?" Mara asked. "With you and her?" Jace settled into the chair beside the bed, reaching over to maintain contact with both his new daughter and the woman who had given him a reason to believe in futures worth fighting for.
I'm ready for anything. 1 year later, on a warm October afternoon when the cottonwoods along the highway had turned golden and the air carried the promise of winter's approach, Mara stood in the nursery she and Jace had created together, watching
their daughter take her first tentative steps between the crib and the rocking chair where Tom had once planned to read bedtime stories. Hope Elena, now 13 months old and possessed of her father's determination and her mother's gentle stubbornness, gripped the edge of the chair for balance before launching herself toward Mara's outstretched arms. 3 wobbly steps, a moment of perfect balance, and then she tumbled forward into the safety of her mother's embrace, giggling with the pure joy of accomplishment. "Jace!" Mara called toward the kitchen, where he was preparing dinner with the methodical care he brought to everything important. She did it 3 steps. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs was immediate, followed by his appearance in the doorway with flour-dusted hands and an expression of delighted anticipation. "Really? Let me see." Hope, encouraged by the attention and her recent success, repeated the performance with even more confidence, this time making it 4 steps before collapsing into Jace's waiting arms. He swept her up with the practiced ease of someone who had embraced fatherhood as completely as if she had been his. "From birth, look at you, little warrior," he said, spinning her gently until she squealed with laughter, "walking like you own the world." "She gets that confidence from you," Mara observed, settling into the rocking chair and watching the daily ritual that never failed to fill her with contentment. "The way you approach everything like it's a problem to be solved rather than an obstacle to be feared. She gets her stubbornness from you," Jace replied, settling cross-legged on the floor so Hope could practice walking between her parents. "And her beautiful eyes and her laugh and her habit of demanding exactly what she wants when she wants it." The nursery reflected the life they had built together. Tom's carefully crafted furniture blending seamlessly with new additions Jace had made. Photographs capturing Hope's first year alongside the ultrasound images that had first revealed her existence, and toys representing gifts from the extended community that had embraced their family. Most prominently displayed was a framed photograph taken 3 months earlier at the Elena Foundation's first annual fundraising dinner, showing Mara and Jace flanked by trafficking survivors whose rehabilitation had been funded by the recovered money. On the dresser beside that photograph sat a smaller frame containing their wedding picture from the simple ceremony they had held at the clinic 6 months after Hope's birth. Sheriff Cardenas had officiated, Mrs. Rodriguez had provided flowers from her garden, and Dr. Vasquez had served as maid of honor, while Hope slept peacefully in a carrier decorated with the yellow and white blanket that had become her favorite comfort object. The wedding had been everything their previous ceremonies could not be, unencumbered by tragedy, celebrated by people who had witnessed their journey from strangers to family, and focused entirely on the future they were committed to building together. Mara had worn a simple white dress that accommodated nursing, Jace had worn his grandfather's pocket watch, and their vows had been written to acknowledge both the love they shared and the larger mission their relationship served. "Have you seen this?" Jace asked, retrieving a letter from the dresser that had arrived that morning. The FBI sent the final statistics from the Cordova investigation. Mara accepted the official document, scanning its contents with the same mixture of pride and sadness that always accompanied updates about Elena's legacy. Vincent Cordova had been sentenced to life in prison without parole. His organization had been completely dismantled, and the financial evidence Elena had compiled had led to 43 additional arrests across 6 states. Most importantly, the truck stop operation she had identified had been shut down, and the 27 girls who had been held there were now in protective custody, receiving the counseling and support services funded by the Elena Foundation. Each of those lives represented the transformation of tragedy into hope, the conversion of blood money into healing resources. 27 girls, Mara said quietly. Elena saved 27 girls she never met. Elena and you, Jace corrected. None of this would have happened if you hadn't been brave enough to help a wounded stranger, smart enough to see past the surface, and loving enough to fight for our future when everything seemed hopeless. Hope toddled over to her toy box, selecting a carved wooden horse that had become one of her treasured possessions. Not the original one Jace had made for her before her birth, which now sat in a place of honor on the mantel, but a newer version. Scaled for small hands and endless play. She offered it to Mara with the generous spirit that seemed to characterize her approach to life. "Thank you, baby girl," Mara said, accepting the toy with appropriate ceremony. "Are you sharing your horse with Mama?" "Hoss," Hope said clearly, one of the dozen words that now comprised her vocabulary. "Mama Hoss, that's right. Mama's horse." Mara handed the toy to Jace, who began the elaborate game of galloping it across imaginary landscapes that never failed to capture Hope's complete attention. As he played with their daughter, Mara allowed herself to marvel at the man he had become. Over the past 18 months, the wariness that had once defined his every interaction had been replaced by the confident openness of someone who had found his place in the world. His love for Hope was absolute and uncomplicated, free from the uncertainty that sometimes characterizes relationships between step-parents and children. More than that, his integration into the community had been so complete that newcomers often assumed he was a native of Santa Rosa, rather than someone who had arrived as a fugitive with nothing but the clothes on his back and a burden of guilt. He had become the clinic's unofficial maintenance supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez's adopted grandson, and Sheriff Cardenas's go-to consultant on matters requiring both tactical thinking and community sensitivity. "What time is Dr. Vasquez expecting us?" Mara asked, noting the afternoon light beginning to slant through the windows. 4 o'clock. She wants to show us the final plans for the new wing before the construction crews arrive next week. The clinic expansion had been funded by a grant from the Elena Foundation, designed to add capacity for prenatal care and family services that would serve the surrounding communities. It would also include a small memorial garden dedicated to Elena Vasquez, featuring native plants and a bench where visitors could sit quietly and reflect on the power of love to create lasting change. As they prepared to leave for the appointment, Hope's attention was captured by something outside the nursery window. The wind chimes that still hung beside the clinic's entrance, their gentle melody carrying across the distance between the house and the medical facility. She pressed her small hands against the glass, babbling in the musical language of early childhood. "She loves those chimes," Jace observed, lifting her so she could see them more clearly. "They're how this all started," Mara replied, remembering the night when their song had provided the soundtrack for Jace's arrival in her life. "Tom made them for me when I started working at the clinic. He said he wanted me to think of home every time I heard them. And now they remind me that home isn't a place. It's the people you choose to love and the life you build together." She moved to stand beside them at the window, completing the family portrait reflected in the glass. "They remind me that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from broken things that have been transformed into something new." Hope pointed toward the chimes and said something that sounded almost like music, though her pronunciation remained delightfully imprecise. The three of them stood together, watching the October breeze set the chimes dancing in the afternoon light, their melody drifting across the desert landscape like a benediction. "I love you," Mara said to Jace, the words as natural as breathing. "After 18 months of daily practice, I love you too, both of you." He adjusted Hope to a more comfortable position, her small body fitting perfectly in the space between her parents. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love anything." Outside, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in her garden, waving enthusiastically when she spotted them in the window. At 79, she had appointed herself as Hope's primary grandmother figure, a role she approached with the same determined care she brought to her flowers and her legendary cooking. Behind her, Dr. Vasquez's car pulled into the clinic parking lot, right on schedule for their appointment. "Ready to go see what we're building next?" Jace asked. "Always," Mara replied, gathering Hope's diaper bag and the keys to the Honda that had carried her through grief and into love. "But first, let me get the camera. I want to document her first walking day." As she moved around the nursery, collecting the items that comprised their mobile life with a toddler, Mara paused beside the mantel where Tom's photograph sat alongside pictures of their current family. For the first time in months, she spoke directly to the image of her first husband, her voice quiet but clear. "Look what we built, Tom. Look at the family we created from all the broken pieces. I think you would have loved him, would have been proud of the father he's become to our little girl. And I think you would have understood that love doesn't diminish when it expands. It just finds new ways to create light in dark places." The photograph remained silent, but something in the afternoon light seemed to shimmer with approval, with the peace that comes from knowing love continues in forms we never could have imagined when loss felt like the end of everything. "Ready?" Jace asked from the doorway, hope in his arms and patience in his voice. "Ready," Mara confirmed, taking one last look around the nursery that represented the fulfillment of dreams she hadn't dared to hope for during the darkest months of widowhood. As they walked toward the clinic where their love story had begun, Hope pointing excitedly at every bird and flower that captured her attention, Mara felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you have honored both the past and the future, that you have transformed loss into love and tragedy into triumph. The wind chimes sang their welcoming song. The desert stretched endlessly toward horizons bright with possibility, and somewhere in the distance the sound of Hope's laughter mixed with the promise of all the tomorrows they would face together as a family complete.